it can be considered if the good sponsor will agree with my suggestion, because it concerns about the COA and the Ombudsman, because that is the proposal of the Ombudsman, while the COA is okay with such provision on item 5 on the special provision.
One minute suspension, Mr. Speaker.
Session is suspended.
Pag-usapan nila bago mag-amendments. Talaga, if the COA. Tapos mag-manifest na ako dyan.
Alabas ka na lang.
Ha? Mag-okay ka na lang. Mag-usap na lang sila. Ha? Para at least.
Sabi ko sa'yo, yes na lang.
Ikaw lumapit. Oh, good.
Wala, okay na. Yan na, yan na.
Session. The gentleman, sponsor, may now proceed.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there is no more question on the query of my good friend, Congressman Paduano, because I fully agree with his statement, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor. And let me manifest na lang doon sa issue about the EOM and the AR publication. Now, of course, the recommendation of the Office of the Ombudsman to remove the publication of annual audit reports must be carefully evaluated so as not to undermine the principles of transparency, accountability, and prudent governance. As correctly pointed out by the Ombudsman, AARs do not reflect the overall fiscal performance of the agency, and therefore, and conclusive. That is also the statement of the Ombudsman. But while these reports may put our government officials in a bad light, just like the Juju Binay case, especially during election, and I will look into the data with regards to cases filed during election period and the regular annual period. But anyway, before I proceed to that, foremost priority must still be extended to the public's right to be informed on the government's usage of public funds. Likewise, if we withhold certain audit information, it may exacerbate the government's reputation as people may perceive that we might be concealing certain transactions away from public scrutiny. Again, we should cautiously assess and determine the possible implications of the proposal to prevent erosion of public trust. Now, let me proceed to the budget of the Office of the Ombudsman. But before I proceed to that issue, will the good sponsor give us or give this representation in the august body with regards to the numbers of pending of cases filed every year, yung total complaints evaluated, evaluation rate, then yung cases for prosecution filed, and of course the conviction rate. Now, just give me during the 2018 to 2022 data. Why I'm asking this, Mr. Speaker? Because we need to look into this to justify the budget of the Office of the Ombudsman.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm holding here the anti-corruption investigation program, which kanina po nabanggit ko na. I think that we should also realize, Mr. Speaker, that we have had 3 years of pandemic.
Yeah.
No? And I believe that the 3 years of pandemic has affected the investigations of the Ombudsman. But of course, right now, the pandemic has been lifted, and I believe that the Ombudsman will be able to, again, give us a very good indicator on the outcome of the anti-corruption investigation program. The office for 2022, yun na lang, Mr. Speaker, the office has a total workload of 3,767 criminal cases, 2,448 of which were carried over from 2021, while the remainder of 1,319 were instituted in the year under review. So given this, 2,497 criminal cases, or 66.29% of the 3,767 workload were disposed of in 2022, leaving a balance of 1,270 as of December 31, 2022. Also, Mr. Speaker, as I add, reading the performance measures of the Ombudsman, the Ombudsman was also able to dispose 33 forfeiture cases out of the 64 workload in 2022 with a disposition rate of 51.56%. Of the said workload, 38 were carried over from the year 2021, while the remaining 26 were instituted in 2022. With respect to adjudication of administrative cases, given a workload of 3,847, 2,510 cases were carried over from the previous year, and 1,337 as newly instituted, the office was able to dispose of 2,702 administrative cases, or 70.24%, leaving a balance of 1,145 administrative cases as of December 31 of 2022.
So, Mr. Sponsor, can you give me the exact figure with regards to the total workload as of now? Both the criminal and administrative cases of the Office of the Ombudsman. Kasi dito po, napapansin ko lang na during the period of elections, my data is from 2019 lang po, and then 2022. It always goes up, especially during election period, election year. Now, that's why I mentioned about the Jujubinay case, though there is a memorandum circular at the time of COA not to make any special audit on all candidates. But the time, the Office of the Ombudsman was forced to, the Office of the Ombudsman requested the COA at the time to have a special investigation with regards to the Jojo Binay case. Now, I will not deal on that on detail, Mr. Sponsor, but what I'm saying is, in every election year, lumalaki talaga po yung workload ng Office of the Ombudsman. Kasi dito, 2019, the total workload is 11,681, while in 2022, it's also 11,326. While in the previous years, the average is between 7,000 and 9,000 cases of workload.
Yeah, Mr.
Could
Speaker,
sponsor confirm this?
thank you for that information. No? But in the first quarter of 2023, in the criminal cases, we have 1,871 filed and 607 have been disposed. While in the administrative cases, 1,808 have been filed and 622 have been disposed.
Thank you for that information, Ginong Sponsor. Anyway, in relation to the performance...
That would be, Mr. Speaker, from January to June.
January to
6
June.
months.
Okay.
of 2020.
Anyway, kailangan pa siguro dagdagan pa yung confidential fund nyo para tumaas yung rate of disposition of those cases. Anyway, with regards to the budget of the Office of the Ombudsman for fiscal year 2024, the total approved budget in the NEP is around 4.98 billion, while the proposed budget is 6.72 billion. With such variance between the proposed budget and the budget approved by the DBM, ano pong mga projects, activities, and programs ng ahensya na will be affected by this cut of budget?
Well, the salient features of the budget, Mr. Speaker, are personnel services requirements for field and unfilled position as of April 28, 2023. I was told also by the Ombudsman that they would be hiring 100 lawyers by the end of December 2023, Mr. Speaker. And that they will open up satellite offices in several areas in the country so that they can be more effective in adjudicating cases.
Okay. So, how much is the actual proposed budget for that 100 lawyers, and the creation or establishment of satellite offices.
Well, the total personal services requirement for 2024 is 4 billion 103 million 47. So in this budget, that the 100 lawyers actually are included.
So the 100 lawyers is included on the budget proposed.
Personal services.
But this is around 2 billion. What I may say, if I will ask you the priority, of course, this is the priority project of Ombudsman that was last based on your proposed budget. Now, ang question is, ito yung priority nyo, magkano po talaga yung eksaktong or ballpark figure dito sa 100 lawyers and satellite offices? Para matingnan lang po natin.
Kasi, Mr. Speaker, it is more of a continuing organization and continuing feeling of the need of the Ombudsman. So therefore, palagay ko, even to me, it would be very hard to put up a ballpark figure, Mr. Speaker. Basta't binanggit po natin dito that the personal services would be for more than 4 billion. Now, ano to? Well, there is a figure here, 1 billion 26 million 20. Oh.
So that's
Perhaps
almost...
that would be the ballpark figure.
Yeah, that's almost 50% of the total cut with regards to the proposed budget of the Office of the Ombudsman.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Anyway, for my last point, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to manifest that the statement made by the Office of the Ombudsman that it is satisfied with its budget deserves the utmost praise and respect. As our members pointed out during the budget briefing, it is a rare for a government agency to be pleased with what the DBM has approved as their operating budget under the NEP for a given year. Likewise, the statement made by the sponsor to omit o yung pagtanggal sa confidential fund ng the Office of the Ombudsman. But however, Mr. Speaker, considering the vital role of the Office of the Ombudsman in our campaign against corruption, it is only proper to increase their budget and, if possible, retain the original proposal in the amount of 6.72 billion. I earnestly hope that the House leadership and the whole membership of this House would consider this proposed budget to be restored for the Office of the Ombudsman. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Ginoong Sponsor.
Daghang salamat, Congressman Caraps.
Thank you,
Majority
Mr.
Leader.
Speaker, for the full support and his proposal to even increase the budget. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to recognize Senior Deputy Minority Leader Paul Daza.
The Deputy Minority Leader, the Honorable Paul Dasa, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I move to suspend just for a few minutes?
Session is suspended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Ombudsman, Martires, and the other officials of the Office of the Ombudsman. There were certain documents that were requested in the committee hearing by certain members of the House, in particular Congressman Raul Manuel. May we get the commitment from the sponsor that said documents will be provided after lunch. All relevant documents that can legally be provided, copies to the Honorable Manuel.
Mr. Speaker, I assure the good gentleman that the document will be submitted after lunch.
Noted, Your Honor.
Thank you to our sponsor. Mr. Speaker, there being no more members of the minority who wishes to ask questions, I would like to move to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate for the budget of the Office of the Ombudsman.
Mr.
Majority
Speaker,
Leader?
we join the motion of the Minority Leader.
There being a joint motion, both from the minority and the majority, to terminate the interpellation of the budget of the Office of the Ombudsman. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The interpellations of the budget, proposed budget of the Office of the Ombudsman is hereby terminated. Congratulations.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Speaker.
Session is suspended.
Request our next agency. May we request the members of the Commission on Human Rights to please take their place behind the sponsor's podium.
We are now going to resume. I request the guests and the members to please clear the gallery so we can take up the next budget. Session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and the officials from the Commission on Human Rights, namely Chairman Richard Paat Palpalatok, Commissioner Monina Arevalo Zenarosa, Executive Director Jacqueline Ann Digia, Executive Director Carmelo Victor Crisanto. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
We acknowledge the family of the Commission on Human Rights. Welcome to the House of Representatives. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Honorable Jocelyn C. Lim Kai Chong, Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, to answer questions on proposed budget on Commission on Human Rights.
The Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, representing the 1st District of Negros Oriental, the Honorable Representative Jocelyn C. Lim Kai Chong, is hereby recognized to begin the sponsorship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and allow me to give my opening remarks. This coming December 10, 2023, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR. Filipino statesman Carlos P. Romulo worked closely in drafting the UDHR before it was eventually adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948. Needless to say, the Philippines has been part of a long and proud tradition of upholding human rights, especially in giving voice to small nations as well as to the weak, vulnerable, and marginalized sectors. To date, while acknowledging the contributions of the government in upholding this primary obligation to respect and protect human rights domestically, we also have the Commission on Human Rights, or the CHR, a body created under the 1987 Constitution that serves as watchdog, educator, advocate, and monitor so that the Philippine government may give life and better meaning to the aspiration of the UDHR and our very own Constitution. Mr. Speaker, my distinguished colleagues, it is my honor to sponsor the budget of CHR and its attached agency, the Human Rights Violation Victims Memorial Commission, or HRVVMC. For fiscal year 2024, CHR proposed a total budget of 1.924274 billion. However, 976.36 million was the amount approved by the NEP, under the National Expenditure Program. That reflects a 49.29% decrease in their proposed budget. And when compared to CHR's 2023 budget under the GAA, the 2024 NEP budget still shows a reduction of 25.694 million, or 2.56% lower. While its attached agency, the HRVVMC's NEP for 2024 is 40.690 million, or only 67.65% of their proposed budget. Mr. Speaker, CHR plays a critical role in preserving our vibrant, albeit fragile, democracy. It is a check and balance mechanism against abuses in power. CHR primarily investigates state agents and representatives should they incur lapses and violations in their responsibilities. However, there are cases when CHR investigates violation committed by private individuals, particularly if the victims are part of the vulnerable sectors such as women, children, and the elderly. CHR's mandate, in this sense, is not just a set of principles, but a dynamic and comprehensive framework. It encompasses protection, promotion, policy, and prevention of human rights. When a country is seen as committed to human rights, it can attract foreign investments, trade partnership, and tourism. It can boost export and economic growth. Along the way, Congress has strengthened CHR by expanding its role and mandate through new laws. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, expanding the work of CHR has not resulted in the corresponding increase in the budget of CHR. Instead, a review of pieces of legislation brought about unfunded mandates. And this legislative advancement aimed at strengthening CHR's role should indeed translate into a budget that matches its responsibility. So despite these challenges, Mr. Speaker, CHR strives to provide its services through its 600 people strong workforce spread out across 16 regional and 4 sub-offices across the Philippines. CHR's persistence and commitment to its mandate has allowed them to maintain its status A accreditation with the Paris Principles. True to their mandate, CHR is indeed a commission for all. CHR ng lahat, naglilingkod, maging sino ka man. My dear colleagues, as we approach the momentous occasion of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is time to reflect on our nation's journey towards freedom, justice, and equality. It is through the CHR that we hold ourselves accountable. The role of the CHR in our democracy cannot be understated. So in light of its expansive mandate and challenges it confronts, I implore my esteemed colleagues to consider increasing the budget of the CHR for 2024 to its original proposed budget of 1.924 billion. As for the HRVVMC, this body support will allow them to construct the Freedom Museum, a key element of Republic Act 10368, or the Human Rights, Victims' Reparation and Recognition Act. We again seek the inclusion of the special provision for the construction of the Freedom Museum for fiscal year 2024. We must implement what is protected by law, as this is the essence of our democracy. It is equally important that the victims that have been recognized in our courts and agency be given the honor and dignity. Our democracy's health and our commitment to human rights are mirrored in this budget. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, I'm now ready to answer your questions.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Honorable Arlene Brosas from the Gabriela Party List for her interpellation.
The lady from Gabriela Party List, the Honorable Arlene Brosas, is recognized for her interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maraming salamat at magandang umaga po sa ating lahat, Mr. Speaker. Lalong-lalo na sa CHR family, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the sponsor yield to a few questions, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Bago po ako pumunta sa aking mga katanungan, gusto ko pong taus-pusong magpasalamat sa Commission on Human Rights sa naging tulong nila kahapon sa pagpapalaya kina Janila Castro at Jed Tamano, mga environmental defenders at tumitindig laban sa reclamation projects sa Manila Bay na dinukot at nakita na lamang sa kamay ng NTF-ELCAC at pinapalabas ng mga rebel surrenderies. Nasaksiyan po natin kung paanong pinabulaanan ng dalawa ang mga sinasabi ng NTF-ELCAC at ng 70th Infantry Battalion na sila ay mga nag-execute daw ng affidavit. Ang sinasabi ng mga bata ay under duress sila during that time at nilagay sila ng mahigit 2 linggo sa loob mismo ng kampo. So, matinding torture po yung inabot ng mga bata dito. Mr. Speaker, Yun, Mr. Speaker, pasasalamat sa CHR dahil isa po sila sa mga nag-intercede during that time sa Plaridel, Bulacan, kahapon, kagabi, in fact, na dinala namin sa Commission on Human Rights, sina Jed Tamano at Janila Castro. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me go to my questions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, nagkaroon ng pagbaba, yan nga, no, sa budget ng Commission on Human Rights mula 993 million para sa taong ito. Naging 971 million ang budget ng CHR para sa 2024. Tama po ba?
Mr. Speaker, that's correct.
Mr. Speaker, ano po yung epekto nitong budget na ito sa pagtupad ng CHR ng kanyang mandato?
Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of activities or program of the Commission that will be hit most by the cut in the budget. And one of that is the financial assistance program. With regards to the two missing activists that you just mentioned today, definitely CHR is investigating as well and helping, as you said, helping in the investigation, assessment, and evaluation of the program. True, if we have to look at the financial assistance, talagang mababa kasi from 13,750 million ngayon sa 2024 budget, naging 3.8 million na lang. Pangalawa, it will also affect the transportation costs. The lack of funds for local travels of investigators to be prompt up and visible, no, in times of need. And we also have the office supplies and materials, because with the increasing total manpower, of course, the more people you hire, the more you need equipments, furnitures, representations, mobile, security, and supplies. And we also have the training. More personnel hired means increased needs to train and orient new employees. And if you talk of rent expense, considering that CHR regional offices are not owned by the CHR themselves, but they're just renting. So with the cost of inflation and high cost of rent, talagang kukulangin yung MOOE ng CHR. And of course, they also need vehicles, Mr. Speaker. Due to the, let's say, transition from the pandemic to the normal period right now, more travels is needed to conduct investigation, evaluation, assessment on the ground. So malaki talaga yung kailangan, no, na kailangan mag-augment ng budget ng CHR.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, to our sponsor. Yung hindi lang po MOOE, no, yung maapektuhan, hindi lang sa rental ng vehicles. As I understand, mga major programs po talaga yung nawalan na budget cut kasi parang, tama po ba, Human Rights Protection Program ang nawalan. Human Rights Promotion Program. Human Rights Policy Advisory Program, which have been running for a long time na, di ba? So, Mr. Speaker, ito po ay mga mahahalaga. And even po yung meron ding budget cut sa Human Rights Education Program, di ba? Mr. Speaker, ano to lifeblood din ito nung Commission on Human Rights at mahalaga po na itong mga ito ay mapondohan ng tama. So, Mr. Speaker, well, at the proper time, Mr. Speaker, gusto nating sabihin na kaisa tayo sa pagpapataas ng budget. Lalo na itong mga ito na mga long-standing programs ng Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Speaker. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, ang sunod ko pong tanong ay tungkol sa mga batas, no, na kasama ang CHR sa mga implementing agency. So may mga budget cut na nga sa mga program na ito, samantala sa mga batas, no, paano sinisigurado ng CHR na napopondohan yung mga batas na nakamandate sa kanya, no, na i-implement? Gusto ko lang malaman, Mr. Speaker, alin ang mga batas ang unfunded sa ngayon?
Mr. Speaker, tama po si Congresswoman Arlene with regards to many unfunded mandates. And let me cite some of the special laws that were unfunded. We have RA 9851, International Humanitarian Laws of 2009, RA 9262, the Anti-VAUSI Act of 2004, RA 11036, the Mental Health Act, RA 11166, the Philippine HIV and AIDS Policy Act, RA 11188, Special Protection of Children in Situation of Armed Conflict Act, RA 11479, the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, RA 9745, or the Anti-Torture Act of 2009, RA 10353, Anti-Enforced Disappearance Law of 2012, RA 11106, the Filipino Sign Language Act of 2018, the RA 9710, the Magna Carta for Women, RA 9344, the JJWC, or the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act of 2008. We have RA 11930, the Anti-Online Sexual Abuse or Exploitation of Children and Anti-Child Sexual Abuse or Exploitation Material Act, RA 11596, an act prohibiting the practice of child marriage and imposing penalties for violation thereof. We have RA 11862, expanded Anti-Trafficking in Person Act of 2022, Interagency Council Against Trafficking, created pursuant to RA 9208 in relation to RA 10364, and EO 163, 2020, Series 2022, known as Institutionalizing Access to Protection Service for Refugees and Stateless Person and Asylum Seekers. And Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, if we add up the costs of all these unfunded mandates, it will approximately need a budget of 271,607,990 pesos.
So, Mr. Speaker, pinapakita lang sa atin ang mga datos na ito na talagang malaki yung pagkukulang sa Commission on Human Rights ng funding. So, gusto po sana natin ulitin, no, na kung meron po tayong papataasan, paano po makaka-implement, no, ng mga batas na ito, ang CHR, kung hindi natin sila bibigyan ng tamang funding para dito. Napakaraming batas po na unfunded at mahalaga po siya. Mahalaga siyang magawa, no, ng CHR. So, thank you to our good sponsor for pag-iisa, no? Enumerating talaga yung mga laws na involve ang CHR at ang mahalagang mandato nila dito. Yung next question ko po, Mr. Speaker, ay tungkol naman sa mga gaps or baka meron pang mga kailangang gusto o maitulong tayo kaugnay sa mandate ng CHR. Kasi nung naalala ko po, nung hinahanap o nagkakaroon tayo ng paghahanap sa mga ilang mga desaparecido hanggang ngayon, si Loy Magbanwa at kung sino-sino pa, and even si Junila at saka si Jed Tamano, nahirapan sa pagbukas ng mga kampo militar ng nakaraan. O di kaya, paminsan, ang nangyayari, hindi ibinubukas dahil binubukas naman pero certain areas lang or limited lang ang mga areas na ito. And kung ibinukas naman, nasabihan muna. So ibig sabihin nawala na kung meron mang nagtatago sa loob ng kampo ng mga nawawala na mga aktivista, nawawala na mga tao, hindi agad-agad makita ng CHR kung nasaan, no, ang mga ito. So, how can we help, lalong-lalo na sa Kongreso, para magawa yung mandate ninyo?
Mr. Speaker, yung isa talaga na kailangan natin gawin siguro is yung sa charter. Kasi although they are, sabi natin, an independent institution, body, or would say, but ang naka-unique lang dito, sila lang talaga yung walang charter. So maybe through legislative initiative, na siguro si good Congresswoman Arlene Brosas and myself can initiate and sponsor. Siguro ito ang kailangan pa rin nating gagawin aside from the augmentation of their budget.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to our good sponsor. I would be willing, no? Kami po ay willing na makipag-ugnayan kung paano, siguro in aid of legislation, makatulong sa Commission on Human Rights. I know marami pang mga issues na pwede nating i-flesh out kaugnay dito para magawa po ng Commission on Human Rights ang kanyang mandate, no? Or very easy na maayos ang lahat ng ito, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, alam naman natin na bilyon-bilyon ang inilalaan na budget ng gobyerno, lalo na sa confidential funds. Kaya nga kanina, I won't retract, Mr. Speaker, my position regarding the confidential funds ng ilang mga ahensya na kinakailangan naman talagang ilagay sa mga nangangailangan na mga ahensya natin. Sa ngayon, may mga nangyayari na pandarahas, pandurukot sa mga human rights defenders habang marami ang pinapatayong mga malalaking infrastruktura. Samantala, yung komisyon na para sa karapatang pantao, hindi nabibigyan ng karampatang budget na kinakailangan nila. Dapat ilagay natin sa mga ganito, no, na imbis na ilagay natin yan sa confidential funds, sa budget ng Office of the President at mismo sa Office of the Vice President, pwedeng ilagay natin ito sa Commission on Human Rights nang sa gayon, mas may makabuluhang bagay pa ito na mapaggamitan. So, Mr. Speaker, sa gitna ng dumaraming kaso ng human rights violations, mahalaga po ang papel ng Commission on Human Rights. Kaya naman ang kinatawang ito, at the proper time ay susuporta sa pagpapataas ng budget ng Commission on Human Rights. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to our good sponsor.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Honorable Franz Castro from the ACT Teachers Party List.
The lady from ACT Teachers Party List, the Representative Franz Castro, is recognized for her interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Magandang umaga po muli sa ating lahat at lalong-lalo na po sa pamilya ng Commission on Human Rights, sa ating distinguished sponsor, at sa ating pong mga taong bayan. Una sa lahat, nagpapasalamat po ako dun sa in-extend na tulong ng Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Speaker, dun po sa nangyari kahapon about the enforced disappearance ni Jonila Castro at ni Jed Tamano, dun sa assistance na binigay po nila doon sa dalawang environmental defenders po. Okay? So, kaisa po ako ng ating mga kasamahan dito, Mr. Speaker, para mataasan po ang budget ng Commission on Human Rights dahil napakahalaga po ng mandato nila para doon sa pangangalaga ng mga karapatang pantao ng ating mga mamamayan. So, gusto ko lang pong kuhanin yung commitment ng ating Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Speaker, kaugnay dito sa talagang grossly violation ng human rights ni Jonila Castro at ni Jed Tamano. So, matibay ang ebidensya na nagkaroon ng kidnapping, abduction, at nakaranas pa sila ng torture, at iba pang mga iba pang mga mental and psychological na mga torture. Isa rin dun sa mga pwedeng yung mga anti-enforced and involuntary disappearance, at yun nga, dito po sa nangyari kay Jonila at saka kay Jed Tamano, ay talagang marami talagang mga human rights violations na nandiyan din po, nasa batas din po natin yung iba't ibang yung iba't ibang mga pwedeng maikaso. Okay? So, So, kuha lang po ako ng commitment kung makakatulong po ang CHR sa dalawang biktima ng forced disappearances at biktima doon sa kanilang mga human rights violations. Kung matutulungan po sila doon sa pagsasampa ng kaso kaugnay dito sa ating yung binanggit po nating dalawang kabataang kababaihan na environment defenders.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, definitely CHR, actually the primary service of CHR or mandate is really to investigate state agents and representatives should there be lapses and violation in their primary obligation to protect, promote, and respect human rights. So definitely you have the assurance coming from CHR that they will assist in the safety, accountability, and policy reforms.
Yes, salamat po doon sa commitment, Mr. Speaker. Pangalawa po, isa rin po sa mahalaga na pwedeng maging reforma po, no? Siguro kabilang na dito ang judiciary, ang Supreme Court, kaugnay dito sa tinatawag natin ng reforma kabilang doon sa mga freedom writs, yung mga writ of kalayaan, writ of amparo. So dapat po meron din po tayong initiative na magawa sa tulong po sa initiative po ng CHR kaugnay nito. Kasi ito po yung mga protection sana doon sa mga biktima ng red tagging, biktima ng iba pang mga vilification na ito rin sana yung last resort nila para maproteksyonan yung kanilang karapatan at kanilang buhay. So, maari po ba tayong makakuha ng commitment sa CHR ng inisyatiba para po in coordination, Mr. Speaker, sa ating iba pang mga related na agency, kaugnay dito sa reforma, dun sa iba't ibang mga writs na available po sa atin?
Mr. Speaker, you again have the commitment of the CHR. In fact, when we talk of human rights, it is not just the violation, but as well as human right to life, to quality education, to environmental protection, and other concerns. So definitely, Mr. Speaker, you have the commitment coming from the CHR.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker. On the last note, Mr. Speaker, on the martial law victims po, no? So maganda naman po yung commitment din ng ating Commission on Human Rights as regards doon sa Section 5 of RA 10368 about the non-monetary reparation. In fact, nagpapasalamat ako, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, doon po sa letter na ibinigay po ng Commission on Human Rights about dun sa mga letter nila sa DepEd, Department of Education, kaugnay nung sana masimulan na, no, yung mga pwedeng gawin kaugnay doon sa mga non-monetary benefits ng mga biktima. So particular po sa DepEd, Mr. Speaker, yung tungkol doon sa may nakalagay dito tungkol sa educational part. So, education part. So, siguro ang tanong ko na lang po, itong mga letter na ito na inaibigay natin sa Department of Education, meron na po bang commitment as to kung kailan po yung meeting or kailan yung mga consultations with the DepEd po on the part ng tungkol sa education ng martial law?
Mr. Speaker, with regards to the inquiry of the good representative, so far wala pa po. The agency have been sending, or the CHR have been sending letters, communication to DepEd and CHED. However, hanggang ngayon, wala pa ring commitment from the different agencies. So, magpa-follow up na lang po ang CHR. In fact, alam natin, under Section 5 of RA 10368, DOH, DSWD, DepEd, CHED, TESDA, and such other government agency shall render the necessary services as non-monetary reparation. So, under the law, yung government has the moral obligation talaga to provide reparations to the victims. So, I would also like na sana matulungan din ng Kongreso to operationalize these provisions and non-monetary reparation. And if we need to amend the law to make it obligatory for the concerned agencies, then we should introduce necessary amendments here in Congress.
Yes, as regards to the DepEd po, ang nakalagay po naman dun sa law, no, yung education on the curriculum about the martial law. Kasi nga ngayon may mga pagtatangka, Mr. Speaker, on the revision of the history as regards to the martial law. Ito, yung nakita natin, yung mga maaring matanggal yung salitang Marcos, doon sa diktadurang Marcos, doon sa mga textbooks ng ating mga estudyante sa elementary and high school. So yun po yung tinutukoy natin na non-monetary. Kasi mahalaga po ito. I know nagbibigay po ng talagang effort ang CHR to have consultations with the DepEd. So nakita ko nga dito yung mga sulat since November 2022 until August 14, 2023. So wala pa pong sagot. So yun po yung gusto nating matiyak kasi nagkakaroon na nga po ngayon ng revision ng history.
Mr. Speaker, tama po yung observation ni Congresswoman Castro. And kung tingnan natin ang history, as mentioned by the good lady, CHR check na rin yung matatag preliminary and will do in-depth review of it. So yung history in grades 1 and 3 under the makabansa subject are already in the makabansa subjects, and for grade 4 to 10, it will be under the Aralin Panglipunan. But yung sinasabi niyo po na we're still continuing to reach out to the Department of Education. Recently, CHR also sent a letter to DepEd Undersecretary Gina Gonog, the head for curriculum and instruction, to discuss the martial law curriculum.
Yes, okay. So I hope, Mr. Speaker, makakuha din tayo ng update and development kaugnay po nung pakikipag-ugnayan natin sa DepEd, ang CHR, kaugnay doon sa ating doon sa ating history at saka doon sa curriculum ng matatag. Okay, as regards to yung tungkol sa AP. So no more further question, Mr. Speaker. Nagpapasalamat po tayo sa ating distinguished sponsor sa kanyang patiently na pagbibigay sa atin ng sagot. And can I close?
Thank you. Majority Leader.
So, since there is no more members of the minority to propound questions about the budget of the Commission on Human Rights, I move to terminate the deliberation and debate, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, on the part of the majority, we join the minority in the motion to terminate the interpellations on the proposed budget of the Commission of Human Rights.
There is a joint motion, both from the minority and majority, to terminate the interpellations of the proposed budget of the Commission on Human Rights. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The interpellations of the proposed budget of the Commission on Human Rights is hereby terminated. Congratulations.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much. And to our colleagues, we thank for the support coming from the majority for the budget or augmentation of the funds of CHR and its attached agency, the HRVVMC. Salamat po.
Thank you. Session suspended for 2 minutes to allow our members to congratulate the Commission on Human Rights and for picture taking.
proposed budget of the Commission on Elections, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we suspend session for a few minutes for our COMELEC officials to access our
Session
gallery.
is suspended. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and the officials from the Department of Commission and Election. Chairman Erwin George M. Garcia, Commissioner Nelson J. Celis, Commissioner Marlon S. Casquejo, Executive Director Chopisto E. Elnas Jr.
We would like to welcome the family of the Commission on Elections to the House of Representatives. Welcome. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Vice Chair of the Committee on Appropriations, the distinguished gentleman from 1st District of Surigao del Norte, Representative Francisco Jose Bingo Matugas II, to sponsor the proposed budget for the Commission on Elections, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations and Representative of the 1st District of Surigao del Norte, Representative Francisco Bingo Matugas, is hereby recognized to begin the sponsorship of the proposed budget of the Commission on Elections.
Mr. Speaker, my distinguished colleague, our esteemed guests, permit me to make a short manifestation in behalf of the Commission on Election. For the fiscal year 2024, the COMELEC is enjoined to prepare for 2 elections in 2025. The national and local elections in May 2025 and the barangay and SK elections in December 2025. Yet, the Commission's allocation under the 2024 NEP is 38% lower than what the Commission proposed. The items affected, Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, include the provision for internet voting for Filipino overseas, deployment of election machines and equipments, and overtime pay for staff who will be preparing for the 2025 elections, among others. I hope that at the proper time, my dear colleagues, you will support the request of the Commission to give it the proper budget to prepare for the 2025 election. In the meantime, I am now ready to answer your questions regarding the budget of the Commission on Election for fiscal year 2024. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the representative of the party list 4-piece, Honorable J.C. Abalos, to begin his interpellation.
The gentleman from 4-piece party list, the Honorable Representative J.C. Abalos, is recognized for his interpellation.
Mr. Speaker, sa aking mga kasamahan sa Kongreso at sa ating mga panauhin, ang pamilya ng COMELEC sa pangunguna ni COMELEC Chairman George Garcia, sa mga officers ng COMELEC, magandang hapon po. Para sa aking unang tanong po, Mr. Speaker, could the COMELEC provide us a breakdown of the agency's proposed rent lease expenses for fiscal year 2024 and specify the intended purposes of these expenditures?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, magandang umaga. Regarding po sa rent and lease, ang total po na expenses ng COMELEC is about approximately 200 million a year. Dahil po wala po silang sariling bahay nila, all of their offices are rented out. Kahit yung main office sa Intramuros ay nagre-rent po sila. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that we could reconsider the spending priorities for the COMELEC by relocating funds from MOOE to capital outlay, so that this shift in focus should include allocating resources for constructing buildings to serve as field offices. This approach can lead to improved service delivery, efficiency, and long-term benefits, as these buildings will provide a stable base for the agency's operations. Nabanggit nga po ng ating butihing sponsor na walang sariling bahay ang ating COMELEC. And nakalagay po sa ating konstitusyon na isa itong independent constitutional body. This is the only constitutional body that does not have its own building. And no less than the Constitution provides that the Commission should have fiscal autonomy. And this means independence from any political agency. In case magkaroon po ng conflict ang COMELEC at ang LGU, dahil nakalagay sa ating Omnibus Election Code, sa Section 55, that the LGU concerned should provide suitable space for office, paano po kung may conflict? Baka mahirapan po ang ating COMELEC. Ngayon po, Mr. Speaker, para sa aking pangalawang tanong, gusto ko po muna i-acknowledge ang desisyon ng COMELEC na pataasan ang honoraria ng mga guro na magpa-participate sa 2023 barangay and SK elections, increasing it from a range of 4,000 to 6,000 pesos to 8,000 to 10,000 pesos. This is indeed a positive step in recognizing their vital role in ensuring the integrity of the electoral process. Ngayon, yung tanong ko po, in light of this increase, I would like to inquire whether the COMELEC has engaged in discussions with the BIR, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, regarding the possibility of seeking tax exemption, particularly with respect to the value-added tax deduction. This is an important matter to consider, as it can further benefit our dedicated teachers and alleviate their financial burden during their essential electoral duties.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to the tax exemption, ang ating butihing chairman ay yun po ang sanang aspiration niya. But the particular provision on the tax applied on the teachers is nasa batas po ng NIRC. So hindi po siya pwede ma-exempt. So the only way na ma-alleviate yung situation ng ating teachers at mga volunteers is taasan yung sweldo. So that's why our chairman, Chairman George, see to it na from a meager amount of 6,000, magiging 10,000 na siya starting this barangay elections. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker. at sa COMELEC dahil sa kanilang effort sa pagbigay ng karagdagang benepisyo para sa ating mga teacher. Ngayon, sa aking susunod na tanong, this is in the context of the COMELEC gun ban exemption process and the ongoing digitalization efforts in the Philippines. Can you provide insight into the specific measures and technologies COMELEC intends to employ to secure the list of gun owners obtained from the Philippine National Police? Furthermore, how does COMELEC plan to ensure the integrity and transparency of this data while granting exemptions during electoral periods, considering the potential risks associated with digital records and privacy concerns? Lastly, what steps are being taken to streamline and optimize the process of securing gun ban exemptions for every election, making it more efficient and accessible to all eligible applicants?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to the application for gun ban exemption, as of now, since the requirement for LTOP is lodged or is in the jurisdiction of the military and the police, so COMELEC is relying on that list. So the process is the PNP and the military will verify those who are qualified for gun ban exemption and then submit that list to COMELEC for them to issue the exemption. But for the information of our colleagues in the House, sabi po ni Chairman, lahat po ng members of the House are already given a gun ban exemption now because of our work here in the legislature. And then with regards to the process, as of now, the process of giving gun ban exemption is centralized as of the moment. But the Chairman George, plan to decentralize it para mas mabilis. So in the coming election, next election in 2025, siguro nasa regional level na yung pagre-release ng mga gun ban exemption. But still, COMELEC will still rely on the database of the PNP and AFP. Mr. Speaker, distinguished gentlemen.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to know, how does the Commission on Elections intend to set up and actively encourage the utilization of a dedicated hotline na pwedeng ma-access ng ating mga citizen para makapag-report po ng mga instance ng vote buying and various electoral irregularities during the upcoming barangay and SK elections? Furthermore, how does the establishment and effective operation of such a hotline align with the Commission's overarching goal of promoting a peaceful, transparent, and equitable electoral process?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to the hotline, as of now, marami pong hotline ang ginawa ang COMELEC, especially for the coming barangay election. So both cell phone numbers are available. Then we have also online access through email. And as of now, ang ginawa ng ating chairman is from a mere task force, gumawa po siya ng committee, no? Especially to address the issue on vote buying. The committee is composed of the COMELEC, the Bangko Sentral, the Department of Finance, and AMLA, no? Para mas makita nila, because those agencies are more specialized in terms of the subject matter of vote buying. Yun po, Mr. Speaker and distinguished colleague.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, gusto ko pasalamatan ang COMELEC dahil gumagawa po sila ng mga hakbang para maiwasan ang mga irregularidad sa conduct po ng ating eleksyon. Ngayon po, gusto ko pong malaman, before the creation of the Contra Bigay Committee, yun nasa COMELEC Resolution 10946, may mga na-convict na po ba of the crime under Section 261A of the Omnibus Election Code, where among the prohibited acts are vote buying and vote selling? Pwede po ba namin malaman ang percentage ng mga kaso na na-file na may conviction po at na may ipakulong na mga violators sa huling 4 na national elections mula noong 2016 presidential, 2018 barangay, SK, and SK 2019 midterm at 2022 presidential.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to conviction, it's very unfortunate and very sad na for the last 4 national elections, wala pong conviction. Now, the reason for that is karamihan naumpisahan po ang filing, but in the long run, ang complainant and witnesses will withdraw their complaint. Kaya po wala po talagang nako-convict. As to the number of cases filed, marami po, we just don't have the... so the chairman will motu proprio file complaints pag may nag-submit or may nakita yung committee especially for this coming barangay election. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Mr. Speaker, sa Section 28 ng RA 6646 or the Electoral Reforms Law of 1987, it says that for the prosecution of vote buying and vote selling to proceed, the presentation of a complaint and supported by affidavits of the complaining witnesses is needed. Pero alam naman natin at napapanood o naririnig sa mga news reports ang election-related violence. Kasama na ang patayan na nagaganap sa iba't ibang lugar ng bansa. At ito ang malaking hadlang para may mag-file ng complaint kahit nga may mga ebidensya, dokumento, or video pa nga minsan. Sa ganitong kalagayan po, Mr. Speaker, paano po makakatugon ang Kontra-Bigay Committee na tuluyan na nating ma-address ang issue ng vote selling at vote buying?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with the establishment of the committee, ang ating chairman, ang ating COMELEC ay para mabilis yung pag-analyze ng mga cases, vote buying cases. May mga presumptions po na silang in-establish. One of those presumptions, for example, especially at this technological age. So halimbawa, gumagamit ng GCash, electronic transfer yung kandidato. So if ma-monitor po ng COMELEC, bawa, yung isang tao, nagta-transfer siya for 200 persons, that particular act is makukonsider siya na pattern of vote buying already. So that will become a presumption na yung si Mr. A na candidate is involved in vote buying activities. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Mr. Speaker, as of May 23, 2023, the COMELEC stated that they have identified 491,017 flying voters. The COMELEC's automated fingerprint identification system identified cases of double or multiple registrations by comparing fingerprints found in the biometric data of all registered voters in the country. To date, I would like to know how many have been identified by the Commission.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, there are about 400,000 plus that have been identified as double registrants by the AFIS. So, ang nangyayari po, yung kalahati po, kasi double, so that means one of the registration will be cancelled by the COMELEC. So the other half, the 200,000, will remain. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Yeah. Has the COMELEC already been able to solve these in preparation for the upcoming barangay and sangguniang kabataang polls?
Tama po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, na-resolve na po yung 400,000 na cases, yun po yun, ang na-delete na po yung 200,000 doon sa 400,000 double registrant.
Mr. Speaker, may we know the proposed budget allotment for the preparations of the 2025 midterm elections? Can we also get the comparison against the budget used for the 2022 presidential elections?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, for the 2025 election, what is allocated in the NEP 2024 is about 25 billion for the preparation. This is bigger than the 2022 election because during the 2022 election, the COMELEC just refurbished the machines. But for 2025 elections, the COMELEC will now purchase new machines, new system. So lahat po ng procedures magbabago po in the upcoming 2025 national elections, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Mr. Speaker, gusto ko rin po maitanong, how many VCMs will be used in the October barangay SK elections? Ano rin po ang number of voters per machine ratio noong May 2022 elections at ano rin po ang magiging projected ratio natin para sa upcoming barangay SK elections?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, for the upcoming barangay election, manual po ang gagamitin ng COMELEC, hindi po gagamitin ang BCM. So, magiging regular po yung number of voters per precinct, nasa 250 to 300 lang po per precinct yung botante. As to the number of machines that was used in the 2022, 107,000 machines po yung sa 2022, and then the COMELEC is aspiring to use more machines in the upcoming 2025 election to reduce the number of voters per precinct. But this all depends sa budget po na maibigay sa kanila. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, at sa ating COMELEC.
Thank you very much po.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move for a few minutes suspension.
Session is suspended. Session is resumed.
Speaker, I move that we recognize the representative from the Kabataan Party List, Congressman Raul Daniel Manuel, for his interpellation.
The gentleman from Kabataan Party List, Representative Raul Manuel, is recognized for his interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good sponsor yield to some questions?
Yes po, distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, noong committee level budget briefing ng COMELEC, nag-commit po ang COMELEC na by Wednesday, September 13, 2023, ay ipapadala ang mga kopya ng telco transmission logs noong May 9, 2022 elections. We would like to manifest na natanggap ng ating opisina ang mga kopya kahapon lamang 4 p.m. We'd like to know bakit po na-delay ang pagpapadala ng copies ng telco transmission logs.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, if I remember it right, during our budget hearing, hindi po nag-commit ang COMELEC ng oras sa pag-submit ng logs, except that they committed that they submit it on Wednesday. And they did po kahapon, Wednesday. Yun po yung submission nila. But may mga events po na hindi nila because they had an event yesterday, kaya po na-delay yung submission sa office niyo po, distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, before September 13 po, nag-commit ang COMELEC. And when it said it will send copies on Wednesday, ang ibig sabihin po nun ay yung immediate na paparating na Wednesday, which was supposed to be September 13, 2023. Pero kahapon po, it's like parang week after na, Tuesday na po, nakuha ng ating opisina ang copy ng transmission log. So gusto lang po nating i-put on record since that affects the quality of our deliberations given na napakahalaga po ng topic na ating pinag-uusapan. Mr. Speaker, nabanggit din ng COMELEC na bakit marami yung mga election returns na galing sa iisang private network. Ang nabanggit po ng COMELEC ay dahil sabay-sabay daw na binili ang 4G modems na napunta sa NCR at Region 4A. Kaya pare-pareho daw exactly ang IP address. Mr. Speaker, ang tanong po natin, hindi ba't sabay-sabay din naman binili ang mga lumang modems na ginamit sa iba pang mga bahagi ng bansa? Kasi kung ganon, bakit hindi sila pare-pareho ng IP address? Bakit mas sa NCR and mga probinsya sa Region 4A yung pare-pareho?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to the IP address, it was, the reason given by COMELEC during the budget briefing, it was they changed the old modem, the 3G modem to the 4G modem. And it was the telco, the telephone companies who established the IP address that will be used for those routers. Since the IP address that was given is in the nature of a static IP, no? So hindi siya nagbabago. And normally, pag sinasabi nating IP address, pwede pong gamitin ang isang IP address not only in one location, but in different location for purposes of security. No? Kasi we want to avoid any eavesdropping or tinatawag natin na hijacking of transmission. So actually, yung magkaroon ng isang IP address is really more for security than anything else. Distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, ang tanong po natin, bakit nakakonsentrate sa NCR tsaka sa Region 4A ang paggamit ng iisang private IP address? Kung yung mga 4G modems naman ay sabay-sabay na binili at para magamit yung bagong mga modem sa iba't ibang bahagi ng bansa, bakit nakakonsentrate sa mga lugar lamang na iyon ang paggamit nitong 192.168 na IP address? Mr. Speaker, posible ba nating matrace doon sa 20,300 na mga bagong modems? Can we trace na kung meron bang mga napunta din sa mga lugar outside NCR and Region 4A? Kasi yun po yung mag-confirm ng binabanggit ng ating sponsor na yun yung justification talaga. Dapat hindi lang sa NCR tsaka 4A. Dapat sa ibang bahagi din ng bansa, merong gumamit ng 192.168.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, nung 2022 election, ang normal process ng delivery ng equipment, especially the routers, inuuna po yung malalayo. So, basically, yung malalayong lugar, like Mindanao, or the northern, southern, central Mindanao, magkakaroon po sila ng specific IP assignment. Because the network that was established by the COMELEC is tinatawag natin na Virtual Private Network or VPN. And under VPN, pwede po mag-designate ang isang telco ng isang particular IP address na gagamitin. Pwede nga, in practice, like in BPO, business process outsourcing companies that do legal tinatawag natin na legal work dito sa Pilipinas, pero yung company is in the US, they can assign one IP address lang per area. Like for California, isang IP address. For New York, isang IP address to protect the data that is being transmitted. So, this representation also experienced that during my work before I was a member of this House in programming and systems designing. So, hindi po siya questionable yung pagkakaroon ng single IP address. And besides, pwede po siyang, COMELEC is open, no? Sinasabi nga nila ng COMELEC na yung mga logs ay nasa website na pwede nating i-download. So anytime of the day, pwede po i-download yung logs para makita yung activity within the questionable IP address. And we can maybe, if the distinguished colleague want to be satisfied, we can also question the telco involved, no? Because it's in their network that they're the ones who gave the IP address that you are questioning, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Mr. Speaker, yung mga logs na downloadable sa website. As mentioned also nung natanong natin ito sa committee level budget briefing, yun po ay mga reception logs. At iba po ang tinatawag nating transmission logs. At yun po yung ating hinihingi. Hinihingi din po ito ng mga IT experts and the advocates of free and fair elections. At yun po ang nabanggit na nasubmit sa atin pero delayed at hindi na kapag comply doon sa nabanggit na date of submission on record. Pangalawa, Mr. Speaker, crucial po yung discussion natin kasi pag sinabi po nating IP address, bawat device po, well, by default, halimbawa po, lahat po tayo na may cellphone, lahat po tayo na may laptop, lahat sa atin na may iPad, bawat device po, iba-iba yung IP address niyan. Kasi ang purpose ng IP address ay para malocate, no? Kung ano yung device, saan siya, sang bahagi man ng mundo, ano, ibig sabihin parang string of numbers siya, no, na pang-locate ng kahit anong device pa yan na nakakonect no, sa isang connection. Now, Mr. Speaker, kung meron mang mga gagamit ng iisang IP address na common for devices, depende din po yan sa gamit. Kaya po ang brewing na tanong sa mga kababayan natin, bakit when it comes to the elections na supposedly kaya nating matrace kung saang, halimbawa mga presinto, saang mga machine galing, halimbawa yung isang particular result, yung IP address na unique para sa mga BCM na yun po sana yung makakapag-guide sa ating lahat, ano, para talaga ma-ensure natin at mabura na, no? Kung kaya mabura na yung lahat ng mga tanong, ano. Pero the questions remain and the questions are gaining steam dahil gumamit ng iisang IP address at nasa isang private network pa, Mr. Speaker. Ang banggit din ng ilang mga election watchdogs na dapat din nating point out, ano, ang local area network na pribado, hindi po yan covered ng final report ng mga election watchdogs. Kasi po, that was unknown to them until recently exposed. Yung private network, it intercepted all election returns transmitted by vote counting machines and relayed these to the transparency server using devices na, again, iisa lang po ang IP address. So ano po ang komento ng ating sponsor doon?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to your question and your issue with the IP address, I think the best evidence here is yung election returns dun sa precinct level. So until now, wala pa pong nakikitang election return na hindi nag-match doon sa final transmission. In fact, other watchdog like NAMPREL, PPCRB, ay nag-agree po sila doon sa resulta. So even if we question bakit single IP address, yung resulta po, kung mayroon talagang nangyari, magkaka-diferensya sana yung nasa precinct level compared doon sa transmission. And to add, no, kaya nga ang COMELEC is doing a virtual private network, mahirap kasi yung ma-expose yung transmission to the public. Yung sinasabi niyo pong each device ay mayroong IP address. Totoo po yan for our cell phone, for our Wi-Fi here in the house, kasi we are in a public network. No? Sa public network, kailangan talagang gawin mong separate IP addresses para ma-identify mo yung ownership ng device. But in this case, since the election process is not an ordinary process, so we have to protect ang integrity po ng election. So that's why a virtual private network was created in which the network engineers, no, and with the supervision of COMELEC, can designate single IP, double IP, pwede pong gawin yan. Na madali namang gawin yan for the network engineers. And if we question the setup of the single IP, we can question the telco, the company that set it up. No, in this case, I think it was Globe. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Madam Speaker, before I respond doon sa accountability ng telco dahil sila yung in charge doon sa private network, I will get back to that later. Pero, Madam Speaker, doon sa pag-refer sa tindig na ating mga election watchdogs like NAMFREL, Madam Speaker, qualified po ang sinabi ng NAMFREL. Ang sabi po ng NAMFREL, based sa kanyang recent statement this September 2023, based on available data, wala silang nakikitang anomalya. Ang qualification po dyan, Madam Speaker, based on available data. Na, again, itong paggamit pala ng iisang private network to have one IP address sa 20,300 no, na mga election returns, ito, Madam Speaker, hindi ito na-incorporate no, doon sa kabuang analysis ng ating mga election watchdogs. Also, Madam Speaker, NAMFREL na rin ay nag-raise ng red flag na as we are speaking right now, our current automated election system is not transparent. Kaya, like, more than a year after the elections, sumali na rin po ang NAMFREL sa panawagan na ilabas ang mga transmission logs at hindi reception logs. Also, Madam Speaker, ang binabanggit na, okay, wala namang discrepancy sa natanggap ng transparency server, tsaka ano yung nilabas ng election returns. While we can't debate on that right now, Madam Speaker, meron naman tayong isang alarming na observation. And we have some samples, Madam Speaker, ng kung ano yung nasa ER tsaka ano yung nasa transparency server. Madam Speaker, halimbawa, ang VCM sa Barangay 73, Caloocan City with precinct ID 75010757, nagprint po siya ng ER or election return at 8:39 p.m. ng May 9, 2022. Again, Madam Speaker, let's take note of the time, 8:39 p.m. Pero Madam Speaker, from the same VCM, nasabi po ng transparency server na nakatanggap siya ng election return at 7:27 p.m., Madam Speaker, from the IP address 192.168.02. Madam Speaker, that's 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 35 seconds before na-print yung ER dun sa presinto sa Barangay 73, Caloocan City. Another sample, Madam Speaker, VCM sa Barangay Paso de Blas, Valenzuela City with precinct ID 7504053. Na-print po yung ER 9:34 p.m. Pero nasabi ng transparency server, nakatanggap siya ng ER 8:16 p.m. And that's 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 10 seconds before na-print yung ER. Kasi po, dapat napiprint muna yung mga ER bago may maipadala. Third sample, Madam Speaker, meron din tayo. VCM sa Barangay Bambang, Batangas City with precinct ID 100700015. Na-print ang ER 9:10 p.m. Pero may natanggap daw ang transparency server at 7:25 p.m. Advance po ng 1 hour, 45 minutes, and 15 seconds. So ano po ang komento dito ng ating sponsor?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, ang first comment ko po dyan, you're talking about the time, no? But the most important thing with regards to election return is yung resulta po. Ang tanong po is, if nag-differ ba ang resulta nung sinasabi nating transmission doon sa election return? Because kahit sabihin natin nag-differ sa time, but hindi naman po binibilang yung time, yung resulta yung binibilang kung ano po ang dapat na boto. So kung si Juan nakakuha ng 100 votes, sabihin natin by 9 o'clock, pero yung na-transmit 100 votes din by 8 o'clock, I think it won't matter because at the end of the day, candidates are proclaimed based on the result. No? Ano yung binoto ng tao, yung will ng tao. Then second, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, doon po sa transmission, sa printing of election return, dalawa po kasing set yon. No? Ang first set is the first 8, and then the second, yung second 22. And normally, siguro lahat naman alam paano mag-print yung isang VCM. Napakabagal po. Hindi po siya mabilis. No? So, may time lag talaga. Naglalag yung time between the first election return, the second, the third, the fourth, hanggang 8. And then, there's another 22. Then, hindi mo pa pinapasok yung circumstance na for every printing, nanggugulo pa yung watcher. Nagkakaproblema pa yung BEIs natin. So, talagang magkakaroon talaga siya ng time lapse or time lag between the first transmission doon sa first 8 saka sa second 22, second set na 22 election returns. But at the end of the day, yung kino-consider natin is yung result, hindi po yung time. No? So, the candidates are proclaimed based on the result. As long as the results are the same, I think yung time of transmission will not matter anymore because yung importante, nakita natin ang will ng tao na bumoto. Madam Speaker, distinguished gentlemen.
Madam Speaker, 2 points. Ang dapat po na patakaran, ang mga election returns, dapat po yan ay piniprint, 8 copies as mentioned, at dapat po may isang kopya na binibigay sa mga poll watchers to verify the results of the election bago po gumawa ng kahit anong transmission ang VCM papunta sa transparency server. Yan po ang magtitiyak, Madam Speaker, na na-check ng taong bayan kung ano yung total na nabilang na boto ng isang VCM bago po yan mai-transmit. Kasi po kung hindi po na-verify ano yung itatransmit, questionable na po kahit magtugma pa yung nakaprint sa election return tsaka yung nasa transparency server. Second point, Madam Speaker, I cannot accept yung justification na basta pareho lang yung nasa election return tsaka yung nasa transparency server, regardless of the time difference, okay na po yun. Madam Speaker, ang implication po nun ganito. If we have an analogy, for example, ako, Madam Speaker, nag-text ako sa'yo. Madam Speaker, nauna pang may natanggap ka bago ako nag-send ng message. So, Madam Speaker, sino yung nag-send ng mensahe? Hindi ko pa nga alam, hindi ko pa na-click yung send, hindi ko pa na-finalize, na-edit yung aking ite-text. Ano? So, Madam Speaker, that is just an analogy to show na kaduda-duda na advance pa na may natanggap yung transparency server bago pa actually na-print yung walang kopya at nakapagbigay sa poll watcher. Yun, Madam Speaker, kaya naglilinger yung ganong mga tanong, no? Dahil ang nagiging mga justification din talaga ay malabo at hindi po madaling malunok ng ating taong bayan. And if I may proceed, dun sa telcos, yung dapat na sumagot regarding the single IP address na tagamit ng private network. Madam Speaker, ang private network na iyon ay within the COMELEC local area network created by Smartmatic at a cost of 1.053 billion pesos. Ibig sabihin po, pinagkagastusan din ito ng taong bayan. And now, we have lingering questions about the election. So, ano po ang tugon ng ating sponsor na hindi lang po yung telcos yung dapat sumagot doon, pati yung COMELEC tsaka Smartmatic?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, first, doon sa question, yung election return na tinatanggap ng poll watcher. Yung doon po sa first 8 election return, hindi po kasama doon ang poll watcher na tumatanggap. Doon po siya sa second set, sa 22. Kasi yung first set, ang binibigyan yung mga citizens arm, NAMPREL, mga poll watchdog, major party, minority party. So doon po siya nakakakuha sa second set ng 22, which is, again, will justify na meron time difference yung transmission. No? And then, in addition, dito po sa pag-question doon sa integrity ng result, nagkaroon po ang base sa batas natin sa automation law, meron pong random manual audit na ginagawa ang mga watchdog, Lente, NAMPREL, and based on the RMA, random manual audit, if I'm not mistaken, 99.7 or 99.8 accurate yung resulta based on the random manual audit. And then with regards to the final issue on the Smartmatic, yes, ang COMELEC is ready to question Smartmatic on these issues. In fact, hindi nga nila nire-release yung retention payment, which as of now, hinihingi ng Smartmatic because COMELEC wants Smartmatic to answer also the issues. So pwede po, at the proper time, pwede pong sumali ang kagalang-galang natin na colleague na siguro with the approval of our chairman, with the coordination of our chairman, pwede pong sumali sa pag-interpolate doon sa Smartmatic. Kasi as of now, hindi pa naman nababayaran ang in full ang ating ang Smartmatic. Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Madam Speaker, kailangan po nating aralin ang implications na hinahayaan under our automated election system na magpadala ng kung ano yung nasa election returns papunta sa transparency server, dumaan pa sa isang private network na hindi pa nabibigyan ng kopya ang mga citizen arms o yung mga electoral watchdogs. Madam Speaker, pag ganon, na-limit na lang sa iilang mga tao, and most likely yan ay ang mga political actors themselves, dun sa pag-verify, no, kung magagawa pa iyon, dun sa election returns, habang short-changed ang ating mga election watchdogs. Kaya, Madam Chair, babalik yon dun sa point na ang observations at ang conclusions na ating mga election watchdogs are based on what was only available, what was made available to them. Pero itong mga recent na observations at ang mga lumitaw na mga nangyari pala noong elections last year ay hindi pa ito fully taken into account sa ano ang tindig ng ating mga election watchdogs. Kaya to wrap up this interpellation, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, I would like to request that the Commission on Elections put into writing yung sagot doon sa ating mga dagdag na mga tanong sa mga hindi pa head-on na nasasagot ng COMELEC. Kasi yung gusto lang naman natin, Madam Speaker, ay fully reliable, mapagkakatiwalaan na tipo ng eleksyon. And with an automated election system, we have seen na hindi posible na maging fully reliable ang eleksyon. Kaya may mga bansa po nauna pang nagsubok ng automated election system kaysa sa atin, but they let go of a fully automated election system dahil sa mga naging karanasan nila na ngayon ay nararanasan na rin natin. Yun lang, Madam Speaker, and thank you to our honorable sponsor for answering our questions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if I may respond to the final statement of our dear colleague. Yes, our commissioner, our chairman, Chairman George, has recognized yung mga issues na ito. It's not, hindi nila dinidispense yung issues na to. But on the contrary, magiging bago na po ang sistema in the coming 2025 election. First of all, wala na pong transparency server this coming 2025 election. Para wala na po yung issue doon sa IP address. It will be direct from the precinct, diretso na po doon sa main server ang ating resulta. Second, magkakaroon na po tayo ng precinct level sort of virtual counting para hindi na ma-question ng mga kandidato kung yung boto ng kandidato pareho ba doon sa boto ng election return? Pareho ba sa resulta na piniprint sa election return? Ibig sabihin, magkakaroon po ng opportunity ang mga watchers na tingnan yung ballots na na-feed doon sa machine for this coming 2025 election. Mapipicturean nila yung mga balota, and then they can count it manually doon mismo sa presinto bago i-print yung election return so that they can compare. No? So pag nakita nila walang diferensya, that will now put to bed lahat ng mga issues doon sa questionable counting ng ating mga machine. No? In addition, finally, doon sa transmission na naging palaging issue natin sa election, based doon sa terms of reference ng ating COMELEC, ay gagamit na po ng blockchain technology ang ating COMELEC para maging secure ang ating transmission. And for those who are not familiar with blockchain technology, it's one of the new technology that will assure na mahirap, close to none, yung tampering or hacking na mangyayari because of its characteristic of immutability, immutable recording process ng isang blockchain technology. Thank you po, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, may we move to recognize the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, the gentleman from the 1st District of Northern Samar, Representative Paul Daza, for his interpellation.
The Honorable Paul Daza is recognized for his interpellation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good afternoon to Chairman Garcia and the other COMELEC officials and to my colleagues. Will the sponsor yield to a few questions?
Yes, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Madam Speaker, there are many very good social services programs of both the national government and many local government units. For the national government, we have programs that help indigent patients under DOH, called Medical Assistance to Indigent Patients. In fact, the Department of Labor also has very good programs, the TUPAD program for unemployed individuals in crisis. We have government internship programs. DSWD has social services like assistance to individuals in crisis situations, which everyone calls AIX. May I ask the sponsor, what is the status of the many requests for the exemptions for these programs?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, first for the DOLE program, TUPAD, the COMELEC now came out with a resolution to exempt the TUPAD program until election day? Even during the election period. And for the AIX, it is not allowed during the period of October 20 to 30. So, meaning, from this day until October 19, pwede po yung AIX. Madam Speaker, distinguished colleagues.
Well, thank you for that, Madam Speaker. May I ask why the different treatment for TUPAD and AIX? In fact, the AIX program, if you look at the guidelines, Madam Speaker, AIX is used for to help indigent and patients in crisis for medical, burial, catastrophe, and many other emergency crisis situations. So what's the rationale where TUPAD is exempted for the entire period, but AIX, if we have constituents who may, let's say, get sick, hopefully none will pass away, or maybe, hopefully we don't have any typhoons or catastrophe. If that happens during the campaign period for the barangay elections, what's the rationale that AIX will not be utilized in that time period?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, for AIX in general, the resolution states that it is not allowed during the period of October 20 to 30. But if the financial assistance is very specific, for example, burial assistance, that is allowed during the election period. If there's a calamity, God forbid, no, in this coming election, automatic exempted yung mga social services. Then, as ang difference lang, if we generalize yung social service na AX lang ang gagamitin natin na label doon sa pagbigay, magiging bawal yon within the period of October 20 to 30. But if we give the financial assistance on a specific aspect, burial siya, medical assistance, transportation assistance, hindi po siya bawal, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you for the clarification. But it may be just subject to interpretation, and knowing the political situation in many areas, it may unnecessarily expose officials who may want to do good, you know, and then because that resolution or memorandum might complicate things for everyone, especially when it's really basically you're helping, you know, constituents who are having difficulty. What's your thought of the sponsor on that?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to social services, ang pagbibigay po, especially yung bawal, yung po sa kandidato, yung po ang pinagbabawal ng COMELEC. So hindi pwedeng mamigay ang ating mga barangay candidates. But tayo po, sa mga congressmen, mga House of Representatives, because we have our own program, social services program, we can continue to help our constituents through these social services. Even ang mga mayors and governors, kasama po yan sa pupwedeng magbigay. Because hindi naman po tayo kandidato this coming barangay elections.
Okay, so to clarify for the House and for the public, social services like DSWD, Assistance in Individuals Crisis Situation, Dole Tupad, if it's implemented by non-candidates, so meaning ang bawal lang are the barangays, essentially that will not be a violation of any COMELEC rule.
Tama po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Okay, and does that also apply to the medical assistance program of the DOH?
Yes, kasama po, Mr. Speaker.
Is there an official exemption for the DOH MAE program already?
Kasama po sa resolution, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you for that. I'm sure many of our local government officials will appreciate also further clarification. So, LGUs, municipalities, cities, and provinces who may have various social services programs, because they're not candidates, they are not prohibited from continuing their various social services programs. Is that correct?
Yes po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, as long as these are regular programs na ginagawa. Meaning, ginagawa natin on a regular basis, hindi natin ginagawa dahil may eleksyon. Because there are some LGUs who are just creating new programs, particularly for this coming election. Pero pag ginagawa na natin yan years before, hindi po siya bawal.
So meaning, Mr. Speaker, if a mayor, an LGU had an appropriation in their 2023 budget for, let's say, an item called social services to constituents in need, would that be interpreted as a continuing program and not in violation? Correct? Would that be correct?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yes, pag ngayon lang niya po linagay, hindi niya nilagay, let's say for example, he was elected mayor in previous terms, pero hindi niya ginagawa yung program, kailangan niya pa humingi ng exemption from COMELEC.
Okay, so meaning if it's, let's say, a supplementary appropriation requested by the governor or the mayor, that may be in jeopardy of running to the issues of COMELEC.
Tama po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. As long as we can, it's clear na hindi po siya ginagawa before.
Okay, thank you for those clarification. I think we all appreciate that, especially with the barangay elections coming up. My second question is, can the sponsor shed light to many of the concerns of all members, actually, both in the majority and the minority, regarding the tax compliance requirements of candidates for the barangay election? Could you shed some light on what really that is, the requirements, the paperwork, and why that was required by the COMELEC?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, may I ask for what particular requirement are you referring?
The BIR requires, the BIR requires tax registration for candidates for the barangay election. I'm sure the COMELEC knows that. So what's the background of that? Did the COMELEC agree with the BIR that this is a requirement, as part of the requirement of becoming an official candidate? What's the process? So I think that's many members of the House, and actually the public, are interested what's really that tax registration is all about.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to that 500 peso requirement of the BIR, that's not within the jurisdiction of COMELEC. Hindi po siya requirement for the barangay candidate to file his candidacy. That requirement stems from the requirement to file SOSE. Lahat po ng kandidato nagpa-file ng SOSE. Under po the NIRC, meron pong requirement of registration. So, doon po ang BIR on their own, implemented that requirement because nakikita nila na at the end of the election period, everybody should file SOSE kasi nasa batas po ng Omnibus Election Code. So, with that, kailangan po sila mag-register with the COMELEC. So yun po, yung 500 is a sort of registration lahat ng kandidato. Because the BIR is expecting na the candidates will receive financial donation from their supporters. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues.
For the public who may be listening in to our deliberations, can the sponsor elaborate on the SOSE? I mean, we understand what that is, but for the people who are listening.
The SOSE is a statement of contribution and expenditure of each candidate in every election. So that is a requirement by the COMELEC that all candidates should file, whether barangay candidates or national level candidates. So if the candidate will not file, especially if they will forget to file twice, so they will be subject for disqualification in the succeeding election. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
And from what I recall, the SOSE, I think, has to be filed within 30 or 45 days after the election day.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, for barangay election purposes, after 30 days.
Okay, 30 days.
To clarify po, yung 500 peso requirement, hindi po requirement ng COMELEC. So it's the BIR on their own.
And does the COMELEC support the BIR requirement? Because that's burdensome. There are many SK members, candidates, who are students who have no income, and they're being required to pay 500 pesos. I can't recall, I think this is the first time it's being implemented. I didn't realize that an election period is a revenue generation activity for the national government. It's somewhat shameful, Mr. Sponsor. What are your thoughts on that?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yes, the COMELEC do not agree with the BIR. No? Kasi it's really a financial burden on the part of the barangay, especially with the barangay candidates.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that. Now, my understanding, when you file that statement of contributions and expenditure, it is not filed with the BIR, it's filed with the COMELEC. So, to connect the filing of the SOSE with the tax registration is really completely separate.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, the reason that there's a connection because in the filing of SOSE, kailangan po mag-attach ng mga resibo. So yung resibo po galing po sa BIR. That's how to liquidate the donation. But the problem with yung presumption ng BIR doon sa donation, sa financial donation, pinapresume nila na subject to donor's tax, which in fact, hindi siya subject to donor's tax. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Is the sponsor familiar with Article 5 of the Philippine Constitution, in particular Section 1, that refers to suffrage?
Yes po, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, part of that Section 1 reads, no literacy, property, or other substantive requirement shall be imposed on the exercise of suffrage. Would the good sponsor agree with me that the tax registration and the 500 peso requirement may be a violation of Article 5, Section 1?
I agree po. The sponsor agrees. My distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker.
Can we get the position of the COMELEC, having the sponsor already supported this representation's opinion on it, to come up with an action plan to deal with this issue?
Mr. Speaker, yes po, the COMELEC will come up with an action plan because it's really not part with the requirement of filing the candidacy. So, and it violates the section under Article 5 that you mentioned, distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker.
Is there still a possibility, Mr. Speaker, that the COMELEC can come up with some sort of an issuance to make that BIR requirement not applicable for these upcoming barangay elections?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yes po. The answer is yes. The COMELEC will come up with a resolution or a petition advisory addressed to the BIR by tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you very much. Many of the members are happy with the assurance and the commitment made by the good sponsor. I appreciate your support on that particular issue and the clarification for the many concerns on social services. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize Honorable Joseph Stephen Caraps Paduano of Abang Lingkod Party List.
The Honorable Joseph Paduano, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. Before I make our favorite motion of every agency's budget deliberation, let me manifest, Mr. Speaker, that this representation supports the budget of the Commission on Elections. And in fact, I'm urging the members of this honorable body to support the restoration of the budget for consideration with regards to the preparations for the national and local elections this coming 2025. Namely, the ballot paper and ballot printing, the overtime pay, the voter education and advertising expenses, deployment of election machines, equipments, and supplies, just to name a few, of course, and the budget for the internet voting for our overseas Filipinos. That is around 5.969 billion, Mr. Speaker. I urge this honorable body, this august body, to please support the restoration of such budget mentioned. And, Mr. Speaker, there will be no other members from the minority who wishes to ask questions. I move to terminate the budget. I move to terminate the period of interpellation on the budget of the Commission on Elections. So move. Mr.
Majority
Speaker.
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we join the motion to terminate the budget interpellation on the proposed budget for the Commission on Elections, Mr. Speaker.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker.
There is a joint motion from the minority and majority to terminate the interpellation of the proposed budget of the Commission on Elections. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the interpellation for the proposed budget of the COMELEC is hereby terminated. 2 minutes suspension to allow the next batch of government agency to occupy the place.
Consider the proposed budget for the Commission on the Filipino Language.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Please proceed, Your Honor.
Speaker, I move that we suspend the session for a few minutes to allow our officials from the Commission on Filipino Language to access our gallery, Mr. Speaker.
Session is suspended.
Mabilis lang naman. Para ano naman. Let's raise awareness. Ready.
Ang next is
OMB.
Optical Media Board. Okay,
Yes.
in due time ha. Kasi mabilis lang to. Hopefully. Already na?
We're ready. Lightning round, lightning round. Tababa ako, mataba.
Session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and officials from the Commission on the Filipino Language, Chairperson Arthur Casanova, Commissioner Dr. Benjamin Mendelio, Director General Marites Taran, Chief Administrative Officer Salvador Sagadal, Budget Officer Nida Erenio, Planning Officer Angelica Elizar, Budget Officer Norman Abubo. So move, Mr. Chair.
We would like to welcome the Commission on the Filipino Language family. Welcome to the House of Representatives. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, the representative distinguished gentleman from the 4th District of Pangasinan, Honorable Christopher VP de Venecia, to sponsor the proposed budget for the Commission on the Filipino Language.
The Honorable Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations from the 4th District of Pangasinan, the Honorable Representative Christopher de Venecia, is hereby recognized to begin the sponsorship of the budget of the Commission on the Filipino Language.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished members of the House of Representatives, ladies and gentlemen, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. It is my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino for fiscal year 2024. The KWF implements links and advocates for research aimed towards the development, promotion, and preservation of the Filipino language and other languages in the Philippines. The KWF has one major program, namely the Filipino and Other Philippine Languages Development Program. And under such program, they have 5 anchor projects: the Sagip Wika, or language preservation; the Yamang Wika, or language repository; the Sigla Wika, or language revitalization; the Sulong Wika, or the language promotion; and the Salin Wika, or language translation. In the 2024 GAB, the total budget of KWF is 73.3 million, which is a 9.1% decrease from its budget in the previous fiscal year. The KWF originally requested DBM for 129 million, so we are still lacking 55.8 million for this agency, very important agency, to carry out its mandate. The reduction negatively impacts the agency insofar as the amount of Philippine language preservation programs carried out and the release of the Diccionario sa Wikang Filipino mobile app. Programs such as translating nutritional infographics to select Philippine languages and the implementation of the Filipino Sign Language Act will also be hindered. So, Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, I solicit your kind support for the approval and augmentation of the Commission on Wikang Filipino's budget. Thank you, and we are now ready for interpellation.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, I will now move that we recognize the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, Representative Paul Daza of the 1st District of Northern Samar.
The Honorable Deputy Minority Leader, the Honorable Paul Daza, is recognized.
There being no members from the minority who wishes to question, I move to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate for the said budget for the Commission.
Majority Leader?
Speaker, we join the motion by the Senior Deputy Minority Leader to terminate the interpellation on the proposed budget for the Commission on Filipino Language, Mr. Speaker.
There is a joint motion to terminate the interpellations of the proposed budget of the Commission on the Filipino Language. Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved. Congratulations.
Motion to suspend for a few minutes, Mr. Speaker.
Session is suspended.
Thank you so much.
Sa full house.
Sa akin yun. Ikaw ba yun? Determinate ko. May tanong ka ba? Ikaw mag-term, ako magtanong lang. Sige, siya, nagsigurado ka pa. Tatanong. PCP ba? Walang magtatanong.
Go.
Session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move that we consider the proposed budget for the Optical Media Board.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize, again, the Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations to sponsor the proposed budget for the Optical Media Board, Representative Christopher VP De Venecia of the 1st District of Pangasinan.
The Honorable Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, the Honorable De Venecia, is recognized to begin the sponsorship of the Optical Media Board, of the budget of the Optical Media Board. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the Optical Media Board for fiscal year 2024. The OMB regulates the mastering, manufacturing, replicating, importing, exporting, distributing, and selling of optical and magnetic media and its technical variations. The OMB's major program is the Optical Media Industry Regulatory Program, which conducts enforcement operations and inspection of optical media manufacturing and retail establishments, among others. In the 2024 GAB, the total budget for OMB is 64 million, which is a 33% increase from its budget in the previous fiscal year. So this will greatly aid OMB in carrying out their mandate. Mr. Speaker, dear colleagues, I solicit your kind support for the approval of OMB's budget. Thank you, and we are now ready for interpellation.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and officials from the Optical Media Board. Officer in charge, Chairperson and CEO, James Ronald Macasero. Board Secretary Dennis Lorenzo Pinlac. Chief Legal Division Attorney Maria Gia Denise Frias. Chief Registration and Licensing Division Esperanza T. Coronel. Chief Enforcement and Investigation Division Manuel Mangubat. Chief Administrative and Finance Division Janine Joyce Galang. OIC Budget Unit Jennifer B. Azores. And Attorney Chaveli Joanne Labrador Batuon.
We would like to welcome the Optical Media Board family to the House of Representatives. Welcome. Majority Leader.
Speaker, for his interpellation, I move that we recognize the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, the gentleman from the 1st District of Northern Samar, Representative
The Honorable Paul Dasa. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, there being no member of the minority who wishes to question the budget of the Optical Media Board, I move to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, we join the motion of the Senior Deputy Minority Leader to terminate the interpellation on the proposed budget for the Optical Media Board, Mr. Speaker.
There is a joint motion to terminate the interpellations of the proposed budget of the Optical Media Board. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved. Termination, the interpellation is hereby terminated.
Mr. Speaker, motion to move for a few minutes suspension.
1 minute suspension.
Let's go. Yeah. Isa lang to. NCCA, isa lang yan. Or iba-iba pa yung... Iba. Ha? Individual yun? Yeah. O sige, magtatanong si Kong Gabi siya magsara sa Historical Commission. Ako na magtatanong.
All right. Thank you so much, OMB family.
Thank you.
OMB fam. NCCA.
Thank you. Next, please.
I see what NHCP. NCCA. After this.
Sir, pasensya na. We are in a hurry.
We're ready. Ready. All right. But of course.
Session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, Representative Paul Daza. I'm sorry. Mr. Speaker, I withdraw that motion. Instead, I move that we recognize the sponsor sponsor of the proposed budget for the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, the Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, Representative Christopher V.P. De Venecia. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations from the 4th District of Pangasinan, the Honorable Representative Christopher De Venecia, is recognized to begin sponsorship of the proposed budget of the National Commission for Culture and Arts.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts for fiscal year 2024. The NCCA is the coordinating and grants-giving agency for preservation, safeguarding, development, and promotion of Philippine arts and culture. The NCCA has two major programs. First, the National Culture and Arts Coordination Program, responsible for formulation and implementing policies, projects, and grants. These projects include the Cultural Mapping Technical Assistance Program and Administration Operations and continued conservation of the Metropolitan Theater, as well as the creation and establishment of Centros Rizal all over the world. And number two, the National Culture and Arts Development Program. Projects under said program include the establishment and maintenance of schools of living tradition, as well as the celebration of National Arts Month every February of each year. In the 2024 GAB, the total budget of NCCA is 537 million, of which 500 million comes from the NEFCA, or the Endowment Fund, and 37 million is from new appropriations from the GAA. So this is a 30.5% decrease from its budget in the previous year. The NCCA originally requested the DBM for 965 million, so we're still lacking about 400 million for the NCCA to be able to properly carry out its mandate. This reduction will negatively impact the agency insofar as implementing the 4 legislated museums from the previous Congress, administration of the Order of National Artists, and the Gawad sa Manlilikha ng Bayan, or the GAMABA. Implementation of the NAMSIA music competition for young artists, maintenance and programming of the Metropolitan Theater, aanhin ang theater kung walang show or palabas, and many more. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, I solicit your kind support for the approval and, most importantly, augmentation of NCCA's budget. Thank you, and we're now ready for interpellation.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, I now move that we recognize the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, Representative Paul Daza.
The Honorable Senior Deputy Minority Leader, the Honorable Paul Daza, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, there being no member of the minority who wishes to ask questions, I move that we terminate the period of sponsorship and debate for the budget of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, we join the motion to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate on the proposed budget for the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
There is a joint motion to terminate the interpellations of the proposed budget of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved to terminate the interpellation. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and officials from National Commission for Culture and the Arts. NCAA Chairperson Victorino Manalo, Executive Director Oscar Kasaysay, Deputy Executive Director for Administration and Support Services Maricho Teliano, NEFCA Chief Accountant Herencio Lapitan, Administrative Officer Maria Marilyn Estrella.
We would like to acknowledge the National Commission for the Culture and Arts family. Welcome to the House of Representatives. Mayong pag-abot, Mr. Kasaysay.
May we move for a few minutes of suspension?
Session is suspended.
Ano yun?
Yes. Ayun ba nangyari? Oh, no, I defend, sorry. Yeah. Honey.
Session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move that we proceed consideration of the proposed budget of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move that we recognize again the Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, the one to sponsor the proposed budget for the NHCP, Representative Christopher V.P. de Venecia of the 4th District of Pangasinan.
The Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations will again sponsor the proposed budget of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Honorable de Venecia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines for fiscal year 2024. The NHCP undertakes, prescribes, manages, maintains, and administers the manner of restoration, conservation, and protection of the country's historical movable and immovable objects, declare and commemorate significant historical events, historically significant sites, structures, and personages. The NHCP has 2 regular programs. First, Historical Asset Preservation and Management Program, which includes but is not limited to restoration, conservation, and preservation and management of national shrines, historical sites, structures, historical artifacts, and objects. Number 2, the Historical Commemoration and Promotion Program, which is the conduct of commemorative activities on historical events and personages for the public. NHCP also has 2 locally funded projects. One, the milestone commemoration of the 125th anniversary of the Philippine independence, and 2, Philippine Muslim History Project. In the 2024 GAB, the total budget of NHCP is 250 million, an approximately 27.2% decrease from its budget in 2023 of 344 million. The NHCP originally requested the DBM for 452 million, so we're still lacking about 202 million pesos so that this agency can carry out its mandate. The reduction will impact the agency insofar as creating a comprehensive strategy for the use of IT in its operations, as well as implementation of 16 locally funded projects throughout the country. Mr. Speaker, dear colleagues, I solicit your kind support for the approval and, most importantly, augmentation of NHCP's budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're now ready for questions.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, to begin his interpellation, I move that we recognize Representative Paul Daza, Senior Deputy Minority Leader.
The Honorable Paul Daza, Senior Deputy Minority Leader, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many members of the House and even at the local government unit levels who are interested in supporting projects that pertains to establishing historical museums or local museums. Along with that, and to expedite because of the time, I'd like to put a rejoinder to that. There are also LGUs and members of the House who are interested in possibly funding a cultural arts type of center for their cities or provinces. So my question to the sponsor is, what are his thoughts on those type of programs, and who would be the right office and individual that members of the House can speak to for those type of projects?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Speaker. So again, the mandate of NHCP is to administer the restoration, conservation, protection of the country's historical movable and immovable objects. And so if there are such artifacts that are present in the district of the distinguished gentleman, then therefore it necessitates some kind of facility that will preserve such, and therefore a creation of a museum would be most apt. In the previous Congress, there are 4 legislated museums. However, they are unfunded, as recounted to us by the NCCA. But at least there is legislative fiat to be able to establish such museums. The NHCP is not precluded from establishing its own museums throughout the country. It currently manages about 29 museums, but they can certainly add upon the request, and of course we can work together to be able to put budget into that. The National Museum of the Philippines, which is attached to the DepEd, also administers regional museums. So the National Museum works in concert with the NHCP in administering museums throughout the country. Of course, local governments can also administer their own museums, whether on a provincial or city or municipal level. In fact, recently we just inaugurated a provincial museum in Pangasinan called Banaan, in which Chair Manny was with us. So there are many different agencies that can support the creation of museums, even without legislation. But of course, it's always stronger if there is.
On the second one, Mr. Speaker, on establishing some sort of a cultural arts or a performance arts facility, could the sponsor give guidance on that?
In terms of like the design, you mean, Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Or the management plan?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there are some LGUs who actually can fund like a CCP type, but obviously maybe a smaller version in their city or provinces. Who would be the right office who can give guidance on the design, the planning of performance art centers?
So, Mr. Speaker, we will be taking up the budget of the Cultural Center of the Philippines 2 agencies from now. But right now that the main complex is being rehabilitated, part of their thrust is to go into the regions and propose programs, implement programs, but also work with LGUs to set up their own cultural centers as part of a regional network of cultural centers. So certainly the CCP can provide, and we've gotten a nod from our Vice President of CCP, they can support and provide technical assistance to the distinguished gentleman.
Thank you to the good sponsor. Thank you for the information and the clarification. And that's it for my interpellation.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the distinguished gentleman from the 1st District of the Province of Albay, Representative Edsel Lagman, to begin his interpellation.
The Honorable Edsel Lagman, the gentleman from Albay, is recognized for his interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the distinguished sponsor yield to some questions?
Gladly, Mr. Speaker.
There is a concerted campaign to distort and revise the truth and reality of the martial law regime on its gross repression and inordinate plunder. Is the Commission, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, aware of this campaign?
So, Mr. Speaker, in response to the query of the distinguished gentleman from Albay, part of the mandate of the NHCP is to be able to conduct research on, and of course, to be able to preserve and protect and promote the heritage, the history of the country. So, and if I may read from the NHCP briefer, in terms of the historical distortion that is mentioned by the distinguished gentleman, the NHCP believes that on the issue, a whole-of-nation approach is necessary. On the part of the agency, it utilizes available resources, network, and collaborate with trusted communicators and institutions in the public and academic fields and make use of new technologies to expand their audience beyond the traditional makeup. In August of this year, Mr. Speaker, the NHCP launched the National Memory Project, an online platform that can hold a great number of high-resolution digitized materials concerning Philippine national and local history. It envisions the democratization of Philippine history materials, which will make knowledge of the past more accessible to the public.
Well, may we know, let me repeat my question, whether the Commission is aware of this distortion and revisionism of the true facts during the martial law regime.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the agency is very much aware, especially of the disinformation that's being peddled online, and that's why it's amping up its efforts to be able to produce all of these research materials, which admittedly would need even more augmentation on the part of Congress in terms of its budgetary allocation, so that they can produce the material but also mainstream it to the general public through different modalities, not just through physical printed publications or books, but even online.
Has there been any publication of these supposed materials?
Yes, there have been. Sorry, could the distinguished gentleman repeat the question, please, Mr. Speaker? Very sorry.
The distinguished sponsor said that the Commission is conducting research on the necessary materials. May we know whether any publication has already been made out of their research?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, according to the NHCP, 3 publications have actually been produced and disseminated. The first is on, of course, on the issue and subject of martial law. The first is called Mamatay ng Dahil Sa'yo. 2 volumes of that title. There's also a Marcos Pa Rin and also In Dialogue, and among many other publications. So these publications have also been transposed into other forms of creative content. So there are videos on YouTube. There are even animated videos of these publications. So they're trying to reach a broad base and massive audience for their education and awareness of what happened.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, I would appreciate if I could be given copies of this publication
Certainly.
for my perusal and critical assessment.
Mr. Speaker, the NHCP commits to providing the distinguished gentleman with a copy of all of the publications of the kaya ba? All of the publications of NHCP, but definitely at least those texts that were mentioned earlier.
How wide is the circulation of this publication?
So, Mr. Speaker, these texts are circulated and distributed nationwide, even worldwide. They are made available to all of our different foreign service posts. And of course, with the advent of online and transposition to new media, then as long as you have the link, you can access it on YouTube and other streaming platforms.
Are the schools in primary to tertiary education provided with these materials?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The schools are furnished, especially those with libraries. They are furnished with a complimentary copy of these publications to support their ongoing growing of their respective collections.
Okay. May we request a listing of the schools, colleges, and universities which were given complimentary copies of these publications?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. NHCP will provide the distinguished gentleman.
Other than these research and publications, what other efforts is the Commission doing in order to thwart this concerted campaign on distorting and revising the actual facts which occurred during the martial law regime?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. As mentioned earlier, the National Memory Project was launched in August of this month. It addresses precisely that. In addition, there are a lot of conferences, seminars, fora, which are regularly organized by the NHCP to be able to, again, mainstream awareness of history and in accordance with its mandate.
May we request for a written context of this memory program?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. NHCP will provide the distinguished gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, the atrocities and plunder of the Marcos Sr. martial law regime and the sacrifices and heroism of its victims and survivors must never be allowed to be swept under the rug of distortion and historical revisionism. Would you agree with this?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Whatever has happened throughout our history should always be preserved and protected.
Mr. Speaker,
It's
distinguished
precisely
sponsor.
the mandate of this agency. to do so.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, the Filipinos' memory of this darkest era in our history must be perpetuated to repel any attempt of repetition. Would you agree with this?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
And that memory program would be consistent with this statement?
Yes.
Okay. Prior acknowledgement of the horrors of martial law and subsequent punishment of those culpable for the repression and penalties during this tyrannical period must be the conditions precedent to a consensus reconciliation. Would you agree with that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the mandate of this agency is preserve and promote and mainstream awareness of history. So what it is mandated to do really is to make sure that the history is intact and preserved and promoted and disseminated. And there will be other government agencies that will be charged with regards to, certain reparations, for example, or the administering of justice to said victims. I believe we just took up the budget of the Commission on Human Rights earlier, and they're the ones tasked to do just that.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, we cannot move forward together without looking back. The ignominy of the past will forever haunt the present if we attempt to consign to oblivion the inordinate transgressions and flagrant misrule of the martial law regime. Would you agree with that?
Yes, the agency very much agrees with it.
Tomorrow, we are celebrating the 51st anniversary of the Declaration of Martial Law. We celebrate anniversaries not only to commemorate past achievements, but also to condemn past horrors. Would you agree with that, Mr. Sponsor?
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, could we ask the gentleman to repeat the question? I'm very, very sorry.
Tomorrow, we will be celebrating the 51st anniversary of the Declaration of Martial Law. We celebrate anniversaries not only to commemorate past achievements, but also to condemn past horrors. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the agency agrees with it.
With the agreement to these statements by the distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker, I end my intervention. Thank you.
Speaker, if I may just add, the NHCP actually heads the EDSA People Power Commission. Yeah, that was just in addition to the query.
Majority Leader.
The Speaker?
Let the sponsor say his piece.
No, that's all I wanted to add, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker?
Majority Leader, please.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that we recognize the representative from the 3rd District of Camarines Norte, Representative Gabriel Bordado Jr., to proceed with this interpellation.
The Honorable Gabriel Bordado is now recognized for his interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just correct my colleague. I am from the 3rd District of Camarines Sur, not from Camarines Norte. Thank you.
Stand corrected, Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
Noted,
Speaker,
Your Honor, noted.
I understand that the National Historical Commission is handling 29 museums throughout the country. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Speaker.
And, Mr. Speaker, one of these museums is the Jesse M. Robredo Museum in the city of Naga, the heart of Bicolandia. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's correct.
And Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, there was this report that the National Historical Commission would reportedly defund. The word was defund in quotation marks. The 29 museums in the Philippines. Is this correct, Mr. Sponsor?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps the distinguished gentleman can verify the sources because as per the agency, that is incorrect. In fact, all 29 museums receive a total of 99.6 million funding in the General Appropriations Bill, in the project Maintenance and Administrations of National Shrines, Museums, and Landmarks under the Historical Asset Preservation Management Program. And they are in fact also requesting for an augmentation of 45 million to that effect so that they can provide more significant, substantial funding to the said museums.
So in other words, Mr. Speaker, the National Historical Commission will continue supporting and maintaining the 29 museums. Is that correct, Mr. Sponsor?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Speaker.
And according to the data, Mr. Speaker, the National Historical Commission needs at least 45 million pesos to continue maintaining and supporting the 29 museums. Am I correct?
Yes, that's the wish list, Mr. Speaker. To augment the 99 million, the 45 million will go a long way in curatorial upgrade of the 29 museums, as well as structural rehabilitation and maintenance and required security and maintenance personnel.
Mr. Speaker, actually there was a cut of no less than 85 million pesos in the budget of the National Historical Commission. Am I correct, Mr. Sponsor?
I could only find my files. There is a 25.5% reduction of the agency's budget as compared to the previous budget year.
The actual amount is 85 million plus, Mr. Speaker?
Yes. Where? Okay, let's do the computation. So they proposed 452 million. They only got, I can't see it, sorry. They proposed 452 million, they only got 306, I'm sorry. Yeah, that is correct, Mr. Speaker. There is an 85 million peso decrease.
So, Mr. Speaker, I am supporting the move to increase the National Historical Commission, considering its responsibilities and functions, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The agency appreciates that, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader?
Yeah.
You may proceed, Your Honor. The Honorable Bordado, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, there being no other member of the minority who who wishes to interpolate, I move that we terminate the sponsorship and debate in connection with the budget of the National Historical Commission. Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, we join the motion to terminate the sponsorship and debate on the proposed budget for the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Mr. Speaker.
There is a joint motion both from the minority and majority to terminate the interpellations on the proposed budget of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and officials from the from National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Chairperson Emmanuel Calario, OIC Office of the Executive Director Carminda Arevalo, Deputy Executive Director for Programs and Projects Alvin Alcid, OIC Office of the Deputy Executive Director for Administration, Rosario Sapitan, Chief History Researcher, Rinal Talita, Budget Officer 3, Hatch Cruz, Planning Officer 3, Jericho Vester Vargas.
We would like to acknowledge our guests from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Welcome to the House of Representatives.
Speaker,
Majority Leader.
Move for a few minutes suspension.
Session is suspended.
Ako na. Yeah.
Session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move that we proceed consideration on the proposed budget for the National Library of the Philippines.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and the officials from the National Library of the Philippines, Director 4, Cesar Gilbert Adriano, Director 3, Edgardo Quiros, Chief Bibliogra Services, Jennifer Di Masaca, Admin Officer 4, Head Budget Section, Marvin Van Gorja, Librarian 4, Maricel Diaz, Administration Officer 4, John Jeric Pangilinan. So move, Mr. Chair.
Is there any objection? We would like to acknowledge the presence of our guests from the National Library of the Philippines. Welcome to the House of Representatives. Majority Leader.
Speaker, once again, I move that we recognize the Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, a representative from the 4th District of Pangasinan, to sponsor the proposed budget for the National Library of the Philippines, Representative Christopher VP de Venecia.
The Honorable Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations from the 4th District of Pangasinan, the Honorable Representative Christopher de Venecia, is recognized to begin the sponsorship of the proposed budget of the National Library of the Philippines.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the National Library of the Philippines for fiscal year 2024. The NLP serves as the repository of all Filipiniana materials with an extensive collection of library resources available in different forms and media. In fact, it has two major programs. First, the National Library Program, which includes acquiring new library materials, and two, the Library Extension Program, which involves supporting and establishing extension libraries. There are actually also three locally funded projects under said agency. First is the operation of congressional libraries in Tayuman, Tondo, Manila, Balilihan, Bohol, and operation of Batanes Provincial Library in Basco, Batanes. In the 2024 GAB, the total budget for NLP is 177 million, a 22% decrease from its budget in the previous year. The NLP originally requested a DBM for 214 million, so it would be most appreciated if we can augment their budget with 37 million. The reduction unfortunately impacts the agency insofar as the amount of books provided to public libraries, as well as the installation of fire suppression systems and carrying out their literacy programs, among others. Mr. Speaker, I solicit your kind support for the approval and augmentation of NLP's budget. We're now ready for interpellation. Majority Leader.
Speaker, for her interpellation, I move that we recognize Representative Bernadette B.H. Herrera of the party list BH.
The lady from BH Party List, the Honorable Bernadette Herrera, is recognized for her interpellation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, I cannot help but hear your plea for concern for the National Library, especially when it comes to the fire suppression. Because I don't know if you know what happened to the Philippine Post Office. Are you aware, is the sponsor aware of what happened to the Philippine Post Office when it burned down at walang natira kahit ano?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, we are very devastated, along with all of our colleagues, when the post office burned down. I remember a plenary session in which Congressman Benny Abante delivered a privileged speech, and I myself interpolated in support of the need to be able to do an audit of all of our historical and heritage structures so that we can prevent something like what happened in the post office for lack of a fire suppression system.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, marami ba tayong archives pa or national treasures na nasa National Library that needs to be protected?
Mr. Speaker, definitely. They are the primary agency that maintains a collection of Filipiniana materials. They're supposed to be also the premier library in the country. And they proposed for a gas-based fire suppression and alarm system. In fact, this would be a phase 4 of an ongoing program and development that was to the tune of 137 million. Unfortunately, it was not granted by the DBM. And so any kind of augmentation or support will be most appreciated so that we can avoid what happened in the post office to have it with the National Library.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, I share the sentiment of the good sponsor. Dahil sa nangyari doon sa post office, dapat matuto tayo ng leksyon dito eh. Dahil nawala ang mga national treasures natin. So, I feel bad that DBM tinanggal ito sa budget ng National Library considering this is already phase 4. So hindi ko maintindihan kung bakit natin ayaw ipatuloy proteksyonan ang ating premier library sa ating bansa. So Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, sa amin po sa minority, this representation would like to really request our colleagues, especially the Committee on Appropriations, sa ating mahal na Speaker, sana po ibalik natin yung pondo to protect our treasure inside the National Library. Napakahalaga po nito. And I really join and will do our best in the minority to rally for this, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor. And next kong question, Mr. Speaker, is natanggal din yung books para sa mga public libraries?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, that is also something that's unacceptable. And I want to put that on record. And next, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, paano po yung digital platform? Ngayon po ba, pag may tayong kailangan tignan sa National Archives natin, pwede po ba tayong mag-online sa National Library natin? Are there efforts para maging high-tech naman yung National Library natin?
Mr. Speaker, just to sort of qualify the query earlier, it's not that natanggal yung budget for provision of books to libraries. In fact, there's a 5.1 million budget in the NEP. But they are requesting for an additional 5.3 million para mas marami pang books. Now, with regards to digitization, a lot of the Filipiniano collections of the National Library have already been digitized. But certainly, they need more budget to digitize the balance of the Filipiniana, so at least it's preserved and protected. And how much is the budget that's needed? 5 more million as well for digitization of the balance collection of Filipiniana.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, you know, in this age of globalization, napakahalaga po nito, especially knowledge is power. I mean, knowledge is something that's needed by everyone. And yung National Library natin is something that should be a source of that. At syempre, hindi naman natin gusto na mamamasahe pa lahat ng tao para pumunta dito sa Metro Manila para makita lahat ng mga nasa archives ng ating National Library. So I really hope that we could consider that digitalization budget na kailangan po ng National Library. So with that, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, I urge my colleagues, tingnan po natin yung National Library. Nakakalimutan po natin yung importance niya. And it's something that we should really all coordinate and help para nang siguro mapataas yung budget ito, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor. With that, with there being no other members in the minority who wish to interpolate, I move to terminate the budget of the National Library, of course, with a strong plea to increase its budget to consider the fire suppression, the digitalization, and the books to our public libraries. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, we join the motion to terminate the period of interpellation sponsorship on the proposed budget for the National Library of the Philippines.
There being a joint motion to terminate the interpellations of the proposed national budget for the National Library of the Philippines, is there any, there is a motion, joint motion. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is approved. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Move a few minutes suspension.
Majority Leader, session is suspended.
Ready?
the presence of the heads and officials from the National Archives of the Philippines, Executive Director Victorino Manalo, Deputy Executive Director Marietta Chu, Chief Administrative Officer Jocelyn Reyes, Supervising RMA Maureen Janet Mercado, Administrative Officer 5 Marisa Espiritu, Administrative Assistants Jezreel Mara Velasco.
We would like to acknowledge the National Archives of the Philippines family. Welcome to the House of Representatives. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, to sponsor the proposed budget, may we move that we recognize Representative Christopher V.P. De Venecia, Vice Chair of the Committee on Appropriations.
The Honorable Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations from the 4th District of Pangasinan, the Honorable Representative Christopher De Venecia, is recognized to begin the sponsorship of the proposed budget of the National Archives of the Philippines.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the National Archives of the Philippines for fiscal year 2024. The NAP plans, develops, prescribes, disseminates, and implements policies, rules, and regulations on archival public records and documents. The NAP has two major programs. First, government records management, which involves records maintenance and use, transmission, retention, and records disposition. And two, Government Archives Administration Program, which is responsible in planning, setting of policies, procedures, and activities needed to manage records and administer archives. These programs also include the conversion of the holdings of the NAP in paper and microfilm to the digital format. In the 2024 GAB, the total budget for NAP is 666 million, a 33.2% increase from its budget in the previous year of 222 million. Of the 666 million, 505 million is actually allocated for capital outlay, particularly for the restoration of the Intendencia Building Phase 4. This leaves, though, about 160 million for other projects. The agency has requested for an augmentation of 474 million to be used for the expansion of facilities for Central Visayas and acquisition of real property and planning for integrated archives management and electronic records center for the Visayas region. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, I solicit your kind support for the approval and augmentation of the NAP's budget. Thank you, and we're ready for interpellation.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move that we recognize Representative Bernadette B.H. Herrera of the party list BH.
The Honorable Bernadette B.H. Herrera. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There being no member from the minority who wish to interpolate, I move that we terminate the period of sponsorship and debate for the budget of the National Archives. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, congratulations.
Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, we join the motion of the minority to terminate the interpellation. The
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I move that
Majority
we
Leader.
recognize the representative from the 1st District of the province of Albay.
The Honorable Representative Ed Saligman is recognized.
I am supportive of the budget of the archives, but I have some clarificatory questions. So may I be allowed to interpolate the distinguished sponsor?
Mr. Speaker, before we second the motion of the minority to terminate the period of interpellation, may we allow the representative from the 1st District of Albay to continue with this interpellation.
The gentleman from Albay is recognized. You may proceed, Your Honor.
Distinguished sponsor, may we know what the National Archives of the Philippines archive?
Mr. Speaker, the National Archives of the Philippines, again, its mandate is it plans, develops, prescribes, disseminates, and implements policies, rules, and regulations on archival of public records and documents. So to the question, it's public records and documents.
Okay. Now,
and 18 million Spanish records as well.
and how does the National Archives of the Philippines preserve these documents and historical materials?
Mr. Speaker, they have an archives preservation unit that takes care of preservation. And they also have storage facilities, but they are building better facilities in their new headquarters, and that's why they're very grateful for the inclusion of the 500 million for capital outlay for phase 4 of the Intendencia building.
And with respect to other countries, how do we compare with our preservation facilities and techniques?
Mr. Speaker, we have the oldest records in Southeast Asia, except for Thailand.
We have the what?
We have the oldest records in Southeast Asia, except for Thailand. So I guess comparatively speaking, we do have a good track record in archiving public documents.
You know, it's very important to preserve our culture. And the role of the National Archives of the Philippines is really significant. If they need additional funds in order to better preserve our records, then let them submit the budgetary augmentations which they need so that I can join the majority in increasing their budget.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is much appreciated from the distinguished gentleman.
And are they preserving original materials?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Why is it that some important historical materials would go to auction houses and they are auctioned publicly when they should be under the preservation of the National Archives of the Philippines?
Mr. Speaker, if there are such that appear in auction houses, it's because they're non-public records. So they are privately owned papers, even if they are of historical significance.
Well, even if they are privately owned, is it not necessary that the National Archives of the Philippines should participate in the auction at least in order to have possession of these private historical materials? Or is there a need for legislation that these private historical materials must be donated to the state or to the National Archives of the Philippines and not be sold at public auction?
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, given the mandate of the agency, which really pertains to archival of public records and documents, the agency is afraid that they might be subject to some COA regulations that will prevent them from doing so. However, they have spent some resources in procuring private photos or photographs for its photographic collection, which is displayed in their exhibition facility. But perhaps if the distinguished gentleman would like to amend the charter of the National Archives to include also private insofar as coordination, then of course the agency will cooperate and work with Congress to be able to achieve the intended mandates of the distinguished gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, can we request the agency to prepare a draft of a bill to, one, mandate that historical materials in the possession of private individuals must be donated to the state or should be sold at considerably low price to the state. And two, these private materials should not be auctioned in any other mode or form. Can we get that commitment to prepare that legislation?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, actually the National Archives of the Philippines is already in the process of drafting an amendment to its existing charter, and the proposals of the distinguished gentleman will certainly be taken into consideration in the drafting, and then perhaps once submitted to Congress, I will join the distinguished gentleman in co-authoring said measure.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor, and I hope that the National Archives of the Philippines will be very proactive. Mr. Speaker, thank you for this opportunity to interpellate.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, prior to the interpellation of Representative Elsen Lagman, there was a motion registered by the minority, Congresswoman Herrera. Let me again reiterate that we join the motion to terminate the period of sponsorship and interpellation on the proposed budget for the National Archives of the Philippines.
There is a motion, a joint motion from both the minority and the majority to terminate the interpellations of the proposed budget of the National Archives of the Philippines. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The interpellations on the proposed budget of the National Archives of the Philippines is hereby terminated. Congratulations. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider the proposed budget of the Cultural Center of the Philippines.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we acknowledge the presence of the heads and officials from the Cultural Center of the Philippines, Chairman Dr. Jaime Laya, President Michael Nicky Hunya, Vice President Artistic Director Dennis Marasigan, Department Manager Dennis P. Lopez, Department Manager Teresa Rances, Officer in Charge, Budget Division Teresa de Guzman, Budget Officers Miriam Catalan, and Selena Marie Bayon.
We acknowledge the Cultural Center of the Philippines, our guests from the Cultural Center of the Philippines family. Welcome to the House of Representatives. Majority Leader, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I move for a few minutes suspension to allow this mentioned guest to access the gallery.
Session is suspended.
Yeah, mamadali tayo eh.
Session is resumed.
Mr. Speaker, once again, I move that we recognize the sponsor of the budget, proposed budget for the Cultural Center of the Philippines, Representative Christopher V.P. De Venecia, Vice Chair of the Committee on Appropriations.
The gentleman from the 4th District of Pangasinan, Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, the Honorable Representative Christopher De Venecia, is recognized to begin the sponsorship of the budget of the Cultural Center of the Philippines.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to sponsor the proposed budget of the Cultural Center of the Philippines for fiscal year 2024. The CCP aims to promote and preserve the best of Filipino arts and culture by embodying the values of truth, beauty, and goodness. The CCP has one major program, namely the Philippine Arts and Culture Promotion and Development Program. Some of the projects and activities that fall under this program are, of course, the CCP Complex Development Project, which is currently being rehabilitated as we speak. Several artistic projects, such as the CCP Performing Arts Season, in which it showcases the works of Ballet Philippines, Philippine Madrigal Singers, Tanghalang Filipino, Ramon Obusan Folkloric Group, and many other performing arts groups. Of course, it also is the home of the Cinemalaya Film Festival, and it also conducts the annual Gawad CCP para sa Sining. In the 2024 General Appropriations Bill, the total budget for CCP is 357 million, an approximate 21.7% decrease from its budget in the previous year of 456 million. The CCP originally requested the DBM for 1.07 billion, so we are still lacking a 722 million amount so that this agency can properly carry out its mandate. This reduction will negatively impact the agency insofar as the timeline of the ongoing rehabilitation of the CCP complex, budgets for venue rentals for its resident companies, because again, the complex is currently closed, the celebration of the Cinemalaya 2024 Philippine Independent Film Festival, the CCP 13 Artist Awards, loss of funding to 5 national performing arts companies, 15 grantees in the ballet and contemporary dance, theater, orchestral music, choral music, indigenous ensemble, among so many other activities. It's very alarming, Mr. Speaker, so I hope that we can augment CCP's budget. And that being said, I solicit your kind support for the approval as well as augmentation of this agency's budget. We're now ready to answer questions.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the representative of the party list, PhilReca, Representative Presley C. De Jesus, to proceed with his interpellation.
The gentleman from the party list, PhilReca, the Honorable Representative Presley De Jesus, is recognized for his interpellation. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, and to the officials of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. Before I move for determination, would like to make a quick manifestation regarding the budget allocated to CCP with the current proposed budget for fiscal year 2024. The Cultural Center of the Philippines will experience a reduction amounting to 101.5 million compared to this year's appropriations. This representation believes that preserving and promoting Filipino arts and cultures is an investment in future Filipino artists who can draw inspiration and wisdom from our rich cultural heritage. Thus, it is essential that we also invest in the CCP as the leading institution promoting Filipino artistic excellence and making art accessible to all. I firmly support the restoration of the proposed budget that is necessary for the CCP to fulfill its mandate. I hope the minority can get the support from the distinguished sponsor on this matter. Mr. Speaker, there being no more members for the minority who wishes to interpolate, I move to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate for the budget of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Speaker, we join the motion to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate on the proposed budget for the Cultural Center of the Philippines.
There is a joint motion to terminate the interpellation of the proposed budget of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion to terminate interpellations is hereby approved.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, I move for a few minutes suspension to allow the next agency to access the gallery.
Session is suspended.
Thank you.